If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 21, Shedding Skin, Growing Stronger. The next day, Will opened his eyes and glanced out the window. The sky was just beginning to show the hazy light of dawn. He closed his eyes, intending to sleep a little longer, but a feeling of discomfort not only kept him awake but gradually made him more alert. He felt dehydrated. Not thirsty, but like his skin was dehydrated. Will felt as if his entire body was being squeezed, like he was wearing a wetsuit that was a size too small. The discomfort made him roll and squirm on the bed, constantly rubbing his body against the sheets and blankets to find some relief. "Lan, you're awake." Liz, sleeping beside him, was seemingly disturbed by the commotion. She sat up groggily, rubbing her eyes and looking out the window. "It's not light out yet. Can we sleep a little longer?" But Will, bundled up in the blankets, didn't clearly hear what Liz was saying. He only felt that as he wriggled, his body gradually became more comfortable. The feeling was like peeling off that tight wetsuit, bit by bit. His skin could finally breathe the fresh air, which felt much better, though it was still a little dry. "Lan? What's wrong with you?" Liz looked at the constantly shifting and trembling blankets and pulled them back for a look. What she saw gave her a fright. From her perspective, Will's body was covered in numerous white, translucent, thin films. Some had already fallen off onto the sheets, while others were still stuck to his body. This sight shocked Liz wide awake. She immediately scooped Will up and, barefoot and still in her pajamas, ran outside. About 5 minutes later, Will was lying on an operating table at the Primal Beast Research Institute, surrounded by a group of people who looked like doctors, all intensely discussing his condition. "According to my examination, Lord Lan's body is fine. He's quite healthy." Finally, a relatively young doctor stepped forward to give his conclusion. Although this doctor looked young, when it came to the study of Pokémon, he had the most experience among them all. He had been studying the health and habits of the tribe's beasts long before the founding of the Dragonite Kingdom. In the future, he would be known as a Pokémon professor. "Then what is all this?" Liz asked, pointing to the white flakes on Will's body. "I'm just molting. Instead of spending your time studying me over there, you could at least help me pull this skin off." "It's so itchy," Will thought, glancing speechlessly at the group. The operating table was smooth and slippery, offering no friction. Even if he squirmed, it would be hard to rub the shed skin off and would only make him more uncomfortable. He decided it was better to just lie still. Besides, he was getting tired. A Dratini grows by repeatedly shedding its skin. They molt at a frequency of almost once a day, and their bodies gradually get longer in the process. The reason for the repeated molting is that the life energy within their bodies is constantly and uncontrollably expanding. Not only that, but the shed skin of a Dratini is an incredibly rare treasure. In the future era of leagues, people would tan the shed skin of Dratini to make ultra-high-class goods like clothing and boots. It was one of the main sources of income for the Dragonite clan. But Will had no way of telling these people any of this. They couldn't understand a word he said. Even if his bond and intimacy with Liz reached a very high level in the future, she probably wouldn't be able to understand such complex ideas unless she awakened some special ability. "Based on my observations of a certain purple, snake-like primal beast, this may be a molting phenomenon." "Oh? You actually know something?" Will's eyes popped open as he looked at the young Pokémon scholar. Considering this was the Johto region and MT Silver, he figured the man was talking about an Akans or an Arbok. Metapod and Kakuna also had the shed skin ability, but the way those bug types molted was a bit different from how snake-like Pokémon did it. "Is that so? Then what should we do now?" Liz listened and felt it made sense. Snakes often exhibited this kind of molting behavior. Her Lan looked like a little snake, so he probably did too. "Well, with the purple snake beasts, we would manually assist them in molting. But since this is the first time we've seen a beast like your Lan, to be safe, I think it's best to let him molt on his own." "What? What nonsense are you spouting? Are you trying to work this baby to death?" "Liz, this guy's a quack, tell him to get lost." Hearing this, Will lost his composure. A normal Dratini might find it easy to molt on its own, but at his core, he was a human. He couldn't grasp the instinctual knack for it. He already had to use all his strength just to wriggle forward normally, let alone molt by himself. This morning's effort had almost made him vomit up last night's dinner. In response to Will's protest, the people around him just gave him a passing glance. No one knew what cute antics this little thing was trying to pull. After all, from a human perspective, Will was just a little baby Dratini making mew mew sounds. The hearts of the surrounding maids melted as they watched, and they began to understand why their queen was so fond of this little creature. Both were long-bodied, but a baby Dratini was so dopey and cute, while a baby Akans was just creepy. All right, it seems this is all we can do for now, Liz nodded, feeling it was the only option. After all, no one knew if assisting Lan with his molt would affect his growth. In the animal kingdom, molting itself was a trial and a test. Animals that could successfully molt on their own were often stronger, while those that couldn't were simply not fit to survive in this world. With the research concluded, Will was moved to the lawn in the palace's backyard. Using the small blades of grass for friction, Will spent a full 15 minutes finally completing the damned molting process. Wow, after molting, Lan seems a little longer? And, oh, so soft. Liz picked up the exhausted Will, who was lying motionless on the ground, and examined him closely. She discovered that he had changed quite a bit after molting. He was a bit longer, the light blue on his back had deepened in color, and his skin had become soft and tender. The texture was top-notch. I'm so tired. Will lay in Liz's arms, too lazy to even move. The thought that he would have to molt on his own like this every day from now on filled his heart with a sense of despair. He would rather fight other Pokémon than molt. At least fighting other Pokémon gained him experience and sped up his evolution. But molting did very little for him, it was mostly just a necessary part of his body's growth. In some Pokédex entries, it was said that wild Dratini used rushing waterfalls to wash off their shed skin, they didn't go through the effort of squirming it off themselves. This meant that for a Dratini, it didn't matter how the skin came off, only that it came off. And on top of that, a Dratini needed to reach around LV30 to evolve into a Dragonair. If he stayed in the palace without battling, growing only by eating and sleeping like some wild Pokémon, it would take at least a year for him to evolve. That meant he would have to molt 365 times. And even a Dragonair still had the shed skin ability, though the frequency of molting would become much, much lower. No, this won't do. I have to find a way to make Liz help me molt. Chapter 22, You'll stay with me forever, Lan. Liz had no idea what Will was thinking. She had her servants collect the skin he had shed, storing it all in a small jar. This wasn't because Liz had discovered the value of the skin, she just felt it was a significant memento, much like how a mother might keep her child's baby teeth or a lock of hair from their first haircut. Lan is so full of energy, Liz praised, as if she were cooing at a small child. You think I want to be? Will rolled his eyes. However, this side of Liz was something Will had never seen in his past life. The Liz in his memory was a curious and bold little girl. The queen before him now could only be described as gentle and tender. He couldn't help but wonder if this was truly the same Liz. Besides, from what he had heard about her, shouldn't she be a decisive, heroic, and formidable queen? Right now, she seemed no different from an ordinary, gentle wife. Come on, it's time to go back and eat, Liz said, picking Will up and walking back towards the palace. Because of the morning's incident, neither of them had eaten yet. What are we eating? There's a cow-like primal beast on the plains. The researchers discovered that these beasts can produce very nutritious and sweet milk. It's especially suitable for raising young beasts and children, so you should have some too, Lan. It was strange. Although Liz couldn't understand what Will was saying, she could still magically carry on a conversation with him. Humans discovered moo milk this early. Will was a little stunned to hear Liz's words. In the Johto region, there were 3 well-known types of Pokémon milk, Kangaskhan milk, Mariab milk, and Moo milk. Moo milk was, of course, the milk produced by Miltank, and it was a key ingredient in many world-famous dairy products. The cow-like primal beast Liz was talking about had to be a Miltank. But then he remembered that the Pokédex had mentioned long ago that Miltank had been supporting the lives of many humans and Pokémon since ancient times. It just never specified how ancient that was. Besides, even if people were living with Miltank, they most likely just treated them like ordinary dairy cows. In their eyes, a gentle and cute Pokémon like Miltank wouldn't have much fighting ability, so they never considered training them for battle. Looks like my physique is going to grow to an absurd size in this life, Will thought, leisurely swishing his small tail. In his past life, he had grown to such a massive size just by surviving on berries in the wild. In this life, as the queen's darling, eating the most nutritious and delicious food and sleeping in the most comfortable and luxurious bed, how could he not grow up big and strong? In the dining hall, Liz sat alone at a long table, with a row of maids standing on either side. Liz wouldn't have minded dining with them, but they knew their place and would never do so. In the past, mealtime had been a very boring affair for Liz. She didn't enjoy it. But now, things were different. "Bring me the bottle," Liz said to Hestia, who was standing beside her. Your Majesty, this is something we can handle." "Please, eat your meal first," Hestia said, pausing with the baby bottle in her hand. "Bring it here." Liz's attitude was firm, her tone leaving no room for refusal. In moments like these, she truly displayed the air of a queen. Hestia had no choice but to hand the still warm bottle to Liz. "Lan, open wide." Liz held the bottle in one hand and Will in the other, cooing at him with a smile. Her eyes sparkled, she clearly found the process very amusing and was enjoying it immensely. "I don't need a bottle," Will turned his head away in refusal. He was a grown man, how could he use a baby bottle? What would happen to his pride? "Be good," Liz coaxed him again patiently. "No, I am a mighty pseudo-legendary, how could I possibly suck?" Will turned his head again. But this time, Liz seized the opportunity. The moment he opened his mouth to speak, she shoved the nipple inside. "Oh wow, this is actually amazing." Will took a subconscious sip. The moment he tasted the sweetness, he couldn't stop. Moo milk was unlike any milk from his past life. He didn't know how it tasted to humans, but for a baby Pokémon, it was lethally delicious. For Will, it was the best thing he had ever tasted. He hadn't drunk anything this good in over a month. Thinking about the lake water he had been drinking for his entire past life, he had no idea how he had survived. "Such a good boy," Liz praised him with a gentle smile. The surrounding maids couldn't help but smile like proud aunties as they watched the heartwarming scene. It had been a long time since they had seen Her Majesty look so happy. After patiently feeding Will, Liz unhurriedly began to eat her own, now slightly cool, meal. She didn't find it unappetizing. As a child who had come from the tribal period, she was easily satisfied. And Mew. What is that you're eating? Mew? Is that a cocoon? Are people supposed to eat that? Mew, I can't imagine a human being made that. Mew. The culinary arts of your human world have a long way to go. Liz looked at Will, who was lying on her lap, looking up and chirping endlessly. She didn't find him noisy at all, in fact, she found it quite amusing. She couldn't understand what he was saying, of course, but she liked the feeling of this. "You'll stay with me forever, Lan." Liz leaned down and kissed Will's forehead. The latter recoiled in disgust and quickly lay back down. "Oh my god, she got my whole head greasy." Will shot Liz a disdainful look, then lifted his head confidently. "Don't worry. With the lifespan of a dragon type, I'll still be around for another 800 years after you kick the bucket." "Then it's a promise," Liz said, taking his response as an agreement and breaking into a happy smile. "It's a promise." In the afternoon, Liz had to attend to state affairs, and Will was temporarily placed in an artificial lake that had been built in the backyard. Finally, back in the water. My skin was about to crack. Returning to the water, Will swam back and forth, feeling more comfortable than ever. A Dratini really was better off in the water. "Your Highness, even if Lord Lan is a baby, he is still a primal beast. It is still rather dangerous for you." Suddenly, a maid's voice came from outside the lake. Will curiously popped his head out to look. As he did, a small face appeared right in front of his. At some point, a small, expressionless girl had come to the edge of the lake and was now lying on her stomach, probably having watched him swim for a while. "Mew? What are you looking at?" Will asked the blank-faced little girl. The little girl didn't speak. She just lay by the lake, propping her chin on her hands, and continued to stare blankly at Will, who was right in front of her. Chapter 23, Another branch of the Dragonite clan. "Wait, did those servants just call this kid a princess?" Will wondered, looking at the stoic, blue-haired little girl before him. He found it strange. Who could bear the title of princess? Naturally, it would be the daughter of a nation's ruler. But the current ruler of the Dragonite kingdom was Liz, and she had never been married, let alone had any children. So where did this princess title come from? "My name is Iris of the Dragonite clan." Does this kid always speak so abruptly? Will stared at Iris, momentarily stunned. Communicating with a stranger from a different species was already difficult enough, but this child was also completely expressionless. How was he supposed to talk to her? Deciding it was too much trouble, Will chose not to engage with the little girl any further. He turned, flicked his tail, and dove into the depths of the small pond to soak in peace. Time for an afternoon nap. The sunlight in the Johto region is quite nice. Feeling the sun's rays filter through the water and warm his body, Will began to feel a little drowsy. He yawned and closed his eyes. In his sleep, he felt as if he were being picked up again. Must be Liz. Oh well, I'll just keep sleeping. Will couldn't even be bothered to open his eyes. It didn't really matter if it was Liz or not, no one in this palace would harm him anyway. It was only his second day reincarnated as a Dratini, and he had already lost count of how many times he'd been picked up. Liz, Hestia, those beast scholars, and even the Poliwhirl. At the very beginning an infant Dratini's body was simply too weak, and its movement on land was slower than a snail's. Anyone could basically pick him up whenever they wanted, he had almost no ability to resist. He was incredibly lucky that Liz had brought him back, he couldn't even imagine what life in the wild would have been like. As evening approached, Liz, having finished a long day's work, came to the palace backyard and froze on the spot at the sight before her. The stoic girl with light blue hair was holding the light blue beast cub. They lay nestled together on the soft lawn, napping in the glow of the setting sun. How long have they been asleep? Liz walked closer and squatted down for a look. Her niece's drool was all over Lan's face. Hestia! My lady! Carry Iris back to her room. Liz gently took Will from her niece's arms. Yes, my lady, Hestia nodded, bent down, and lifted the still sleeping Iris, carrying her towards the palace. Will was roused by Liz's movements and groggily opened his eyes. The next moment, he was dunked into the pond and swished around, just like rinsing meat for a hot pot. The rinsing shocked Will fully awake. He stared at Liz with a completely baffled expression. There, much cleaner, Liz looked at Will's little face and nodded with satisfaction. She didn't want her land to be marked with anyone else's traces, not even her own beloved niece's. A queen's possessiveness did not bend for such things. Come on, it's time for the evening banquet. Let's get everyone acquainted with you. What banquet? A welcoming party for me? Will tilted his head, looking at Liz curiously. He hadn't expected her to throw a whole party just for him. Liz carried Will back to a grand hall on the first floor of the palace, a place specifically used for holding balls, banquets, and other gatherings. However, Liz hadn't used this place herself in a very long time. It was mostly used by other members of the Dragonite clan, she would just make an appearance to show her face. As soon as they entered the hall, Will felt at least 70 or 80 pairs of eyes converge on him. Ooh, a family reunion, Will noted, his gaze sweeping across a sea of red and blue hair. It was only then that Will guessed the identity of the stoic little girl, Iris, whom he had met that afternoon. He didn't know how many branches of the Dragonite clan had existed in the past, but in the future, only 2 remained. One branch had fiery red hair, represented by the champion of Kanto and Johto, Lance. The other had sky blue hair, represented by the gym leader of Blackthorn City in Johto, Claire. In different versions of the story, their relationship varied between being cousins. Iris was surely a member of this latter branch. And she likely wasn't just any family member, she was probably a child of the main lineage of that branch, which would explain her title of princess. Uncles, aunts, brothers, and sisters, it's been a long time, Liz said, carrying Will to the front of the hall. It was the truth, she hadn't seen these family members in a very long time. Liz lived in the palace, but the other members of the Dragonite clan did not. They could live in other towns of the Dragonite kingdom, or even right next to the palace, but they could not live with the queen in the palace, nor could they use their status as elders or relatives to demand she do anything for them. Iris only appeared in the palace because her family lived nearby, and she often came over to visit. So, on a day-to-day basis, Liz rarely saw her extended family. I haven't seen Liz in 2 years. She hasn't changed much. Speaking of which, it's about time Liz got married. I think Uncle Liam's eldest son is quite a good match. Has Liz finally decided to start training her own beast? It's a bit late, but it shouldn't be a big problem. The members of the Dragonite clan below chattered away, making the grand hall sound like a busy marketplace. To an outsider, one might expect the Dragonite clan, as the royal family, to be haughty and arrogant. But the reality was the exact opposite. The Dragonite clan was proud of Liz's achievements and would fight for her, but this didn't change their fundamental way of life. They still farmed their lands and herded their Multank, working to earn money and support their families, no different from the ordinary citizens of the Dragonite Kingdom. This was the result of Liz's policy of never using her status to grant her kinsmen special favors. She didn't want the Dragonite clan to stand out too much in the kingdom. Becoming disconnected from the common people would not end well. The overlord of the neighboring Kanto region, which had initially been called the Sylph Kingdom 10 years ago, was a clear cautionary tale. Now, it had been renamed the Kingdom of the Land, and its king had been replaced, from King Sylphard to a former commoner named Sakaki the White. Ahem. I have gathered you all here today for a reason I'm sure you are all aware of. This is the child I have decided to raise. His name is Lan. Liz cleared her throat and then lifted Will high above her head. In that moment, Will shone under the lights of the ceiling, and all the members of the Dragonite clan looked up at the small creature. Mew? Am I Simba? Will thought, waving his little tail in the air as he scanned the crowd below. It was then that he noticed something strange. Some of the people below looked unexpectedly pleasant to him, and he felt a natural sense of goodwill towards them. Startled by this change in his own feelings, Will had a sudden realization. The Dragon Force. He was sure of it. There were other special abilities that could make a Pokémon feel unprompted affection, but for it to happen with so many members of the Dragonite clan at once, he couldn't think of any other possibility besides the Dragon Force. Chapter 24, You Again. All these people have awakened the Dragon Force, but Liz hasn't? Will turned his head and gave Liz a strange look. He truly couldn't sense that miraculous power within her. He was a firm believer in things like metaphysics and destiny, so in his view, Liz, as the founding ruler of the Dragonite Kingdom, should have been a major protagonist of this era, or at the very least, an incredibly important character. And yet, a character like that hadn't awakened the Dragon Force? Will found it a little disappointing. If Liz had awakened the Dragon Force, it might have accelerated his growth or even enhanced his combat power. This evening's banquet was, in reality, a way to introduce Will to the clan members, but also to put their minds at ease. In the current era, where beast callers held a high status, Liz, as the ruler of a nation, could command many of the beasts within her kingdom, but none of them were her own. For the time being, this might not have a huge impact. But over time, some people would inevitably become dissatisfied, wondering why someone who wasn't even a beast caller should be the ruler of a nation. Ambitious individuals might even arise, seeking to usurp the throne with the power of their own beasts. At that time, Liz could face a crisis. If Liz were to fall, then the Dragonite clan, as the former royal family, would certainly not be treated kindly by a new king and might even be uprooted entirely. Because of this, many members of the Dragonite clan had long felt uneasy about the matter. But now, things were different. Liz had begun to raise her own beast. Although she was getting a late start, with the abundant resources she had at her disposal, catching up wouldn't be a problem. The only thing they couldn't be sure of now was the potential of this beast cub, and whether it would be powerful in the future. The banquet continued. The events that followed had little to do with Will. Liz, rarely seeing the elders of her clan, had to go and greet each of them and learn from their experience. Will found it all incredibly boring and kept struggling in Liz's arms, wanting to get away. Hestia. Yes, my lady. Take Lan to have some milk. The little one is probably hungry. Liz transferred Will from her arms into those of her personal maid. She had misinterpreted Will's struggles as hunger. Of course. I'll take Lord Lan right away. Hestia took Will and carried him towards a nearby dining table. A high-quality dairy product like Moo milk was available on every table at a banquet like this, there was no need to fetch it from elsewhere. Lord Lan, please wait here obediently. Hestia gently placed Will on the table, then picked up a small bowl to fill with Moo milk. Although Hestia had been rough with Will when they first met, for Liz's sake, she was now very respectful and attentive. Unfortunately, Will wasn't hungry at all. He was just bored and wanted to wander around. I'm gonna go for a stroll. See ya, sis. While Hestia was pouring the milk and wasn't looking, Will leaped off the table. A fall from this height wouldn't cause any harm, even to an infant Pokémon. The moment he landed, Will ducked under the long tablecloth, preventing Hestia from spotting him immediately. But after he got under, he was startled by a small face that suddenly appeared before him. You again? Weren't you sleeping? Will's heart nearly leaped out of his chest as he stared at the stoic girl. Iris looked like she had just woken up. Her hair was a mess, and she was still wearing the same sky blue princess dress from that afternoon. Iris looked at the mewing will before her, an expression of confusion on her face. Suddenly, she scooped him up and wrapped him in the skirt of her dress. The next moment, the tablecloth was pulled aside, and Hestia's anxious face appeared. "Princess Iris? What are you doing here? Have you by any chance seen a light blue beast?" Hestia was a little confused, but it was clear her main concern was the missing will. If he truly disappeared due to her negligence, she would be in big trouble. Iris shook her head. Her small hands, clutching the hem of her dress, tightened slightly. Will had no idea what was happening outside and struggled frantically, causing the bundle of her skirt to move. "Princess Iris!" A glint appeared in Hestia's eyes. She raised an eyebrow, looking at the wiggling, mewing, and trembling bundle of dress. "I don't know anything," Iris said stubbornly, shaking her head again. "Princess Iris, please hand over Lord Lan at once. He hasn't had his dinner yet. He won't grow big and strong." Who was Hestia? The chief mate of the Dragonite Kingdom was a figure who dared to sternly reprimand even Queen Liz herself. What was a little princess in comparison? Oh! Iris wasn't afraid of Hestia. She only relented when she heard that Will hadn't had his dinner. She lowered her skirt, allowing Will to escape. "What do you want?" Will scurried out and looked at Iris, completely baffled. He really couldn't figure out the intentions of a stoic girl like her. It was impossible to understand. "Your Highness, why did you do that?" Hestia was also curious about what Iris was thinking and asked. "He's cute. I want him." X2. Will and Hestia were both rendered speechless. So, there was no complex reason. Iris had done it simply because she thought a Dratini was cute and wanted to be close to it. "But he is Her Majesty's partner. I cannot give him to you, Your Highness," Hestia explained patiently while bringing over a bowl of milk to feed Will. Will originally didn't want to drink it, but Hestia had already shoved the bowl in his face. He was afraid that if he didn't drink it, the bowl would end up dumped on his head. "I'll go talk to my aunt," Iris said naively, then walked towards Liz in the crowd. I would advise against that," Hestia said, a cold sweat breaking out on her forehead. Having grown up with Liz, Hestia knew the Queen's personality very well. Things she didn't care about, she could give away freely. But things she did care about, she would clutch tightly in her hand, even if the back of it was beaten black and blue. She was certain that Liz would absolutely never give land to Iris. There was zero possibility. But Iris didn't listen at all and stubbornly ran up to Liz to ask. A minute later, she came running back, her eyes brimming with tears. "You see? What did I tell you?" Hestia shook her head, not surprised in the slightest. She finished feeding Will the milk and was about to get a napkin to wipe his mouth. But in the brief moment she turned to get the napkin, she turned back to find that Iris was now hugging Will and sobbing. Iris's tears and snot were smeared all over Will's body. And the milk on Will's mouth and nose was smeared all over Iris's princess dress. Hestia's cheek twitched as she watched the scene. The napkin fell from her hand, and her arms dropped limply to her sides. She felt as if her entire world was collapsing. Chapter 25, The Self-Taught Art of Cuteness. The banquet ended. Liz carried Will back to her private chambers. However, the moment they got into bed, Will began to feel uncomfortable all over. He knew what was happening, he was about to molt again. How can it be so soon? Is it because I'm getting too much nutrition? Will remembered that he had just finished molting that very morning. For a wild Dratini, molting once a day was already quite fast. He hadn't expected his own rate to be even faster, needing to molt again in the evening. Or perhaps, this was actually the normal speed for a Dratini in the era of primal beasts, and the molting frequency had simply slowed down in the later era of leagues. This wasn't impossible. As time went on and the eras progressed, the survival pressure on Pokémon gradually decreased, and their natural growth abilities also declined. After all, they no longer needed to fight tooth and nail for survival, so the get stronger genes in their very being naturally weakened over time. One only needed to compare the ancient, giant Dragonite from the lighthouse with the chubby, 2-meter-tall Dragonite of the future to see the difference. So, perhaps in this era, molting twice a day was the normal frequency for a Dratini. If that was the case, however, Will had no idea how big he would eventually become. "Lan, what's wrong?" Liz, now changed into her nightgown, looked strangely at Will. Although she couldn't understand what he was saying, she could sense that he seemed uncomfortable. "No, I have to find a way to make Liz help me molt." Otherwise, how am I supposed to live if I have to go through this twice a day? Will's large, watery eyes darted back and forth. Then, he began to rub his body forcefully against the bed. Soon, a crumpled, translucent white piece of skin was rubbed off. Are you molting again? Seeing this, Liz immediately understood what was happening. Mew. Will burrowed into Liz's arms, nuzzled against her, and looked up with wide eyes, deliberately making a soft, meaningless sound. Damn it, I can't believe I have to resort to putting on the cute act, Will thought, feeling a deep sense of shame. It was his first time ever doing something like this, but he was surprised to find how proficient he was at it, as if he were a natural-born genius of cuteness. No, Lan. You have to do it yourself. Liz could see that Will was asking for her help to molt. But she remembered the words of the beast scholars and still turned her head, refusing his request. Mew mew. Will increased the intensity. This time, he gathered the moisture in his body and made it well up in his eyes, while simultaneously letting out a somewhat pitiful-sounding wail. Oh, what should I do? Stared at by such a pair of teary, glistening eyes, Liz's resolve began to waver dramatically. Mew. Seeing his chance, Will wailed even louder, rolling all over the bed in an apparent fit of agony. Is it really that painful? I guess I have to try. Startled by Will's actions, Liz quickly gathered him into her arms. Then, she carefully and gently peeled off a small piece of the shed skin. She waited for a moment, and seeing that Will had no violent reaction, she continued. Mew. The sound Will made this time was different from before, it was a sound of comfort. This is surprisingly stress-relieving, Liz thought. She let out a sigh of relief and sped up the peeling process. At the same time, she gradually became addicted to the feeling. Looking at the piece of skin in her hand, she kneaded it a little and found that it had a wonderful texture and was very resilient. She realized at once that the skin Will shed was a very high-quality material. However, such a small piece wasn't enough to make anything with for now. She decided to collect it all and see what she could make in the future. With Liz's help, Will completed his mold in less than 5 minutes. He didn't have to expend any effort at all, he just had to lie there and be serviced by Liz. Cuteness technique, acquired. Will thought, contentedly flicking the tip of his tail. Although this cuteness technique didn't appear on his status screen and was useless against other Pokémon, it was a super weapon against the two-legged beasts, especially the older female ones. Alright, you can sleep soundly now, right? Liz couldn't help but smile, seeing how comfortable Will looked. She then wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into her embrace, which could still just barely be called generous. The two of them leaned on each other and gradually fell asleep. The days passed, and a week went by in the blink of an eye. One morning, before Will had even opened his eyes, he felt his head being propped up. Lan, time for breakfast. Open wide, Liz's gentle voice sounded by his ear. Without even lifting his eyelids, Will obediently opened his mouth and waited to be fed. The next moment, a bottle nipple was placed in his mouth, and he began to suckle greedily. After finishing his breakfast, he rolled over, intending to sleep a little longer against Liz, but she clearly had other plans. No more sleeping. You're not a baby anymore. It's time to go to kindergarten. Liz picked up Will, who was now 2.5 meters long, and gave him a little shake. That's right. Will's length had already reached 2.5 meters, making him longer than a future Drago Knight, which only stood 2.2 meters tall. This wasn't actually that surprising. After all, even a Dratini from the era of leagues had an average length of 1.8 meters, not much different from the significantly smaller Drago Knight. In the current era of primal beasts, it was normal for Will's length to far exceed that of his future descendants. And since he had only just left his infant stage, he was only going to get longer. Everyone, including Liz, was amazed by his growth rate. Many members of the Drago Knight clan who had been uncertain about his potential were now convinced that he would grow up to be a powerful and majestic primal beast. Kindergarten? Are you kidding me? I'm a Pokémon, and you want me to go to kindergarten? Will opened his eyes and first checked his status screen. Dratini. Potential, blue. Level, 5. Type, dragon. Ability, shed skin. Height, 2.5 m. Weight, 4.3 kilograms. Moves, focus energy, inherited, wrap, leer, twister. Will looked at his status and compared it to his time as a Weedle. He realized his progress had been faster in his previous life. By this point back then, he should have already evolved into a Kakuna. In this life, he had just left his infant stage and only now had a little bit of fighting ability. This was despite having consumed huge amounts of super nutritious moo milk. The gap was still significant. If he hadn't been picked up by Liz at the beginning and had to grow up in the wild eating plankton or tiny fish, the gap would have been even larger, ridiculously so. But this didn't surprise him. Bug-type Pokémon just grew fast, that was their greatest advantage over other types. If a bug-type grew as slowly as a dragon-type, it would be completely unfair. Not only would they be weaker in the long run, but their lifespans were also far shorter. The only advantage they might have could be summed up in one derogatory word: cheap. Alright, let's go. There are lots of other little friends at the kindergarten. You have to get along with everyone, okay? Chapter 26, The Kindergarten's Problem Child. There's actually a real kindergarten. Will was shocked. He was currently on a plane in the northernmost part of the Dragonite Kingdom's capital. In this place was a school built specifically for infant stage beasts and those who had just recently matured. When he first arrived, Will was astonished. He had never imagined that in an era where even the human education system had not yet been established, a Pokémon education system was already being attempted. But after attending class for a day, he realized something was wrong. This was less of a Pokémon academy and more of a pet finishing school. The beast scholars here weren't teaching these young Pokémon about battle or knowledge. They were teaching them how to dine gracefully, how to walk elegantly, and where to go to the lavatory. Will lay by himself under the cool shade of a tree, sighing as he watched a Meowth stroll elegantly across the lawn in front of him. He understood what was going on now. The Pokémon who came to this academy to be educated were all the Pokémon of nobles. And as nobles, they naturally had to learn aristocratic etiquette. Even their beasts were no exception. This was a good sign, but also a bad one. The bad sign, of course, was that it was delaying the Pokémon's rapid growth period. This golden stage of development, right after leaving infancy, was being wasted on learning such useless things. This was the era of primal beasts, not the era of leagues. In the era of leagues, it wouldn't matter if you learned etiquette or spent all day eating, drinking, and sleeping. But in this era, wasn't this just asking for death? When an enemy came knocking at their door, was this etiquette going to save the nobles? But the reason it was a good sign was that it also proved these nobles were beginning to treat their Pokémon as members of their families, and not just as simple tools. Would those nobles make their own horses learn etiquette? No. Because they were just tools for transportation. These nobles would only send their own children to etiquette school or hire private tutors. At the same time, this kindergarten also served as a research and observation institute for the beast scholars. They would silently observe the different habits of different Pokémon in order to record and study them. No. This is a complete waste of time. I don't want to be a Dratini any longer. Will stood up in frustration, looking out at the 30 or 40 young Pokémon on the grassland. He did not want to live a life where he had to molt twice every single day for a year. He had to evolve, fast. Then allow me to help you all get on the right track. An evil smile spread across Will's face. He scanned the area and noticed that there were very few large Pokémon on the plain. At 2.5 meters long, he was already one of the biggest. This was probably because most people were still afraid to raise Pokémon that were already huge in their first stage. Let's start with you. Will's gaze finally settled on a Shuckle. This Shuckle was only 0.6 m tall. In the era of leagues, that would be an average height, but in this era, it was either malnourished or had definitely not yet left its infant stage. Whatever the case, Will was confident he wouldn't lose to it. Shug. The Shuckle was startled to see such a long serpent approaching it and immediately withdrew its head and four limbs into its shell. Withdraw. It was an innate skill for Shuckle, which raised its physical defense. Mutaday. Will didn't care about any of that. With a flick of his tail. Twister. A dragon-type special attack was unleashed. A silvery whirlwind rose from the ground and swept towards the Shuckle. Shuckle. Hit by the attack, the Shuckle's eyes immediately turned to swirls. Yep, definitely a baby, Will nodded, looking at the one-shot Shuckle. He was only level 5, so his twister wasn't very powerful. The entire whirlwind was only about a meter high, a newborn tornado, you could say. Yet the Shuckle was still taken out in one hit. There was only one possibility, it was so weak because it was still an infant. Otherwise, with a Pokémon like Shuckle's insane stat distribution, this would have been a knocking it out would be extremely difficult. Too bad I can't see an experience bar. I don't know if I get EXP for beating up babies. I'll just have to try a few more times. Will glanced at his status screen, but there was no change. And so, he began to look around, selecting his next target. But things obviously weren't going to go as smoothly as he thought. Because of his actions, all the beast scholars and other Pokémon on the plane had now noticed him. Lord Lan! Look what you've done! Scholar A rushed over to check on the Shuckle's condition. Relieved to find it was only temporarily fainted, he stood up, preparing to reprimand Will. Stop! Lord Lan is not like the other beasts. Another scholar, Scholar B, grabbed his arm and stared warily at Will, afraid he might suddenly go berserk. His reminder made Scholar A immediately realize the situation. These noble-owned beasts were hatched from eggs and had lived beside their masters since birth, they had no wild instincts. But Will was a wild beast that Her Majesty had brought back from the wilderness. Will glanced at them, then simply walked away, returning to the shade of the tree and pretending to be a good little boy. It seems Lord Lan has no intention of attacking us. Perhaps he just had a disagreement with this turtle beast. I don't know. Let's take it back for a full diagnosis first. All right. Seeing Will lie down and not move, the two scholars breathed a sigh of relief, then picked up the Shuckle and left. After the two of them were gone, Will stood up with a smile. This time, his eyes landed on a Teddy Ursa that was 0.5 m tall and, without a doubt, still an infant. 1 minute later, the villainous Will had caused the once adorable, thumb-sucking Teddy Ursa to faint. All right, before those two get back, I'll keep fighting. I'll aim to gain 2 or 3 levels today. Will forcefully stood up, lifting his head to scan the area for any people. Confirming he was alone, he began to wantonly bully the babies. Hiya! Take this! Oof! In the evening, when Scholar A and Scholar B returned to the small plane, they felt as if their world was collapsing. The Teddy Ursa was sitting on the ground, wailing its eyes out. The Houndour had a large bump on its head and was barking furiously at Will, who was dozing under a tree in the distance. Besides them, the ground was littered with a host of other fainted Pokémon, Rattata, Weedle, Bellsprout, Sandshrew, Meowth. As far as the eye could see, every single Pokémon was either lying on the ground or injured. Good heavens! What happened here? What in the world happened? Can someone tell me? The two scholars clutched their heads, on the verge of a breakdown as they looked at the scene of carnage. The Shuckle, who had been brought back, trembled in the back, staring at the great serpent under the tree. The serpent seemed to sense its gaze, opened one eye, and gave it a friendly smile. The Shuckle's eyes rolled back, and it fainted from fright. The Pokémon that were still conscious saw the two beast scholars arrive and immediately ran over to tattle. Although the scholars couldn't understand what they were saying, from their gazes and gestures, they could clearly see that the cause of all this was the cute, well-behaved looking Dratini under the tree. Lord Lan is, without a doubt, a problem child. Chapter 27, Promoted by Force. Night fell. Liz had not yet returned, as someone had apparently requested an audience with the Queen. Will lay alone on the bed, excitedly rolling back and forth as he looked at his personal status screen. Dratini. Potential, Blue. Level, 7. Type, Dragon. Ability, Shed Skin. Height, 2.5 m. Weight, 4.3 kilograms. Moves, Focus Energy, Inherited, Wrap, Leer, Twister. Haha, not bad, not bad. I really did get experience, Will nodded with satisfaction. Although he had only gained 2 levels after beating up 30 or 40 little kids, he was very pleased. After all, he had expended almost no effort in these battles. Many of the Pokémon were taken out in one hit or were easily chased down. He had barely received any injuries. Still, at this rate, I can probably only get to around level 10. After that, fighting these babies probably won't do much. Will sighed, lying on the bed. Although his current living situation was comfortable and safe, and there seemed to be no need to seek out hardship, Will, as a transmigrator with some knowledge of the future, could not truly just lie back and relax. The era of primal beasts was an age where the loss of life reached its zenith. In the ancient age that preceded it, there were only survival wars between Pokémon, and they would not risk their lives to attack other Pokémon unless absolutely necessary. In the era of leagues that would follow, it was a time of great peace, not just for humans, but for Pokémon as well. Even wild Pokémon rarely fought to the death. With human intervention, the number of domesticated Pokémon increased dramatically, while the wild population shrank. This meant that resources were no longer scarce for those in the wild, so deadly competition became a rare phenomenon. Only in this era of primal beasts did war rage everywhere. Pokémon versus Pokémon. Human versus Pokémon. Human versus human. The Whirl Islands War in Johto, the War of Truth in Unova, the Great War of Kalos, these famous conflicts all took place during this time. As the old saying goes, what has long been divided must unite, and what has long been united must divide. The flames of war and the toll of death were destined to be the hooks that would pull in a new era. The era of leagues will definitely come, but that also means the middle and late stages of this era of primal beasts will be filled with war. Countless humans and Pokémon will die. Only after witnessing that horror will more and more people gradually realize the problem and raise the banner of peace. The Dragonite Kingdom, as the sole nation in the Johto region right now, will inevitably be drawn into war, most likely against the neighboring Kanto region. Will swished his tail in frustration. It was precisely because of this situation that he was so desperate to raise his level. If Liz had been the queen of a nation in the peaceful era of leagues, he would have lazed around more than anyone, perhaps even staying a Dratini for his entire life. I have to at least evolve into a Dragonair. That way, even if the war is lost, I can fly Liz away to safety. Will glanced at his status screen again. He needed to reach around LV30 to evolve into a Dragonair. It shouldn't take too long, but his progress would definitely not be as fast as it was in his past life as a Beedrill. Back then, he, Wally, and Millie flew everywhere. Opponents they could beat, they took on solo, opponents they couldn't, they swarmed. They almost never lost a battle and steadily gained experience. In this life, he was just a lonely Dratini. All battles had to be fought by himself. Click. The bedroom door was pushed open. Will didn't even turn his head. Only Liz could enter the Queen's private chambers without knocking, so he knew it had to be her. Lan, how could you beat up the other little ones at the kindergarten? Liz came in, scooped Will's head into her arms, and poked his nose with her finger. So it was those two who came to see you. Damn, they actually tattled on me. Will's mind went blank for a second, then he immediately realized where Liz had been. The two beast scholars from the kindergarten must have run to the palace to complain to her. But this time, Will was mistaken. While the two scholars had indeed reported his rampage, they had also praised his potential. In their eyes, although they were all babies, the fact that Will could defeat dozens of others in a single day meant that he would certainly be stronger than other beasts when he grew up. So, the two scholars had also come to congratulate Queen Liz on acquiring such a promising future general. What you did was wrong, do you understand? Liz said, giving Will's head a little shake. Although she was scolding him, her tone was quite gentle, giving the impression that she wasn't truly angry. I get it. I'll do it again tomorrow, Will said, shaking his head nonchalantly, putting on the air of a rogue. You little rascal, Liz was so exasperated she had to laugh. Starting tomorrow, you're not going to the kindergarten anymore. You're going to the Primal Beast Academy. What? I got expelled after just one day. Will's eyes widened. He had been planning to grind his way to level 10 before thinking about his next step. Now, he was being promoted by force. Although Will hadn't been to this Primal Beast Academy, he could tell just from the name that it was full of Pokémon with actual fighting ability. If the school he went to today was kindergarten to elementary school, then the one he was going to tomorrow was probably middle school to high school. How was his puny LV7 self supposed to grind for experience there? He'd be lucky not to get bullied. Will's expression immediately fell. He turned his head away, ignoring Liz. Seeing him like this, Liz couldn't help but smile, but she didn't try to comfort him. It would be useless anyway. After his violent rampage at the kindergarten today, there was no way she would let him continue there. Besides, according to the two beast scholars, staying at the kindergarten was not a good thing for a beast as wild and full of potential as Will. Going to the more competitive Primal Beast Academy would actually help him grow faster. Alright, let's go to sleep. You'll probably have to molt again when you wake up in the morning, Liz said, changing into her nightgown and slipping into bed, pulling Will into her embrace. The next morning, after once again completing his molt with Liz's help, Will was looking rather listless. You have to get along with everyone at the new school, okay? Just watch me beat them all up. Will twitched his nose, talking big. He knew he probably wouldn't be able to run wild at the new school like he did yesterday, but there was no harm in trash talking. No one could understand what he was saying anyway. Liz returned to the palace to handle her affairs, while Hestia was tasked with taking Will to the legendary Primal Beast Academy. The academy's location was very strategic. It was on the easternmost plain of the Dragonite Kingdom's capital. Anyone unfamiliar with the map wouldn't understand how well chosen the location was. A little further east from this position was the beast-infested MT Silver, and beyond that was the Kanto region, where the Kingdom of the Land was located. Whether it was a stampede of beasts from MT Silver or a surprise attack from the Kingdom of the Land, neither could avoid crossing the grounds of the Primal Beast Academy. In a way, the Academy was the Dragonite Kingdom's last line of defense. Chapter 28, LV7 and Standing Like a Scrub. The training grounds of the new Academy were much larger than the old one. At the same time, the primal beasts were much larger, too. Will stood trembling in the center of the grounds as a circle of other primal beasts curiously sniffed at the new little guy. They were a 10-foot-tall Nidoking, a 10-foot-tall Machoke, an Onyx, 50 feet long and 30 feet high, an 11.5-foot Ursaring, and an 8-foot Donphan. Hey there, Will greeted them cautiously. Meanwhile, his eyes darted around, searching for any sign of the primal beast scholars. I'm the Queen's personal, cherished pet. Shouldn't you have at least 8 or 10 people watching over me? Seeing the grounds were empty of any humans, Will started to panic. These big guys aren't going to beat me up, are they? Being stared down by these giants, Will broke out in a cold sweat. The sheer pressure these massive primal beasts exuded was no joke. The physiques of the primal beasts from this era were just too exaggerated, they were easily double their Pokédex stats, if not more. He would never forget this day. That year, he was LV7 in the Dragonite Kingdom's Primal Beast Academy, standing like a scrub. Speaking of which, something piqued Will's curiosity. How did this guy manage to evolve? Will wondered, looking at the Nidoking circling him. Nidorino needed a moonstone to evolve into Nidoking. He was certain the primal beast scholars didn't know about this evolutionary method. Only 20-odd years had passed since humans began harnessing the power of primal beasts, they probably hadn't even figured out the concept of types yet. So how did this Nidoking come to be? Will didn't believe for a second that these people would dare to capture a fully grown Nidoking from the wild. It was most likely that this primal beast had accidentally acquired a moonstone and evolved. The question was whether its master even knew. Will stood rooted to the spot for a while longer. Seeing that he wasn't giving them any reaction, the big beasts lost interest and wandered off. They weren't interested in such a tiny baby. Few will breathed a sigh of relief as they left. That was nerve-wracking. Hiding in some nearby bushes, 2 primal beast scholars were secretly observing the situation. Lord Lan seems to be behaving himself pretty well. I think he's just scared stiff, ha ha ha. The 2 scholars kept a constant watch on Will's condition. It was no laughing matter. Of course, they wouldn't dare let the Queen's darling get hurt at the academy. Did they have a death wish? After that, the rest of Will's day was peaceful. That evening, he hid in a small lake in a corner of the Primal Beast Academy, quietly poking his head out to survey his surroundings. He had spent the day figuring things out, and this academy was completely different from his old kindergarten. That kindergarten was just a daycare, teaching the Primal Beast toddlers some basic etiquette and leaving it at that. But the Primal Beast Academy was genuinely focused on increasing the combat power of its students. They were being raised as reserve soldiers for the battlefield. The scholars here would organize battles for the primal beasts, not just 1v1s, but even 3v3s, 5v5s, and larger team battles. And they weren't worried about the primal beasts getting carried away. They had a 2-layer safeguard system. The first layer was that most new arrivals at the academy had to go through a period of boot camp. The main purpose was to teach them to obey orders without question. When they heard a whistle, they had to stop fighting immediately. Disobedience meant going hungry or even getting a beating. This boot camp would last for more than half a year, until the sound of the whistle was etched into their very bones. In truth, this training wasn't cruel. In Will's past life as a human, the vast majority of soldiers in the world went through the same thing, with daily training that was often 10 or 100 times harsher. However, Will knew how Pokémon were treated in the era of leagues, where humans cherished them like their own children. With that era as a point of comparison, this kind of training seemed outrageous. In the era of primal beasts, most people didn't see primal beasts as family or companions, but as weapons to be thrown onto the battlefield. He had gotten along so well with Liz these past 2 days that he'd forgotten that in the eyes of most, he wasn't a Pokémon, he was a primal beast. No matter how high his status or how good his treatment, he was still just a primal beast. The second layer of protection was the veteran regular army primal beasts that accompanied the scholars. Every scholar had an adult, high-level primal beast that had fought on the battlefield. These primal beasts were powerful, emotionally stable, and perfectly capable of suppressing the sub-adult reserve troops in the academy. I'm not going to that regular boot camp, it's a complete waste of time. I'd rather find some suitable opponents to fight. Will's gaze swept across his surroundings. As he had discovered, the academy wasn't filled exclusively with sub-adult primal beasts undergoing combat training. There were also adolescent and juvenile primal beasts who were past their infancy but still undergoing obedience training. The adolescent ones were mostly in their second evolutionary stage, with levels ranging from 20 to 30. He was definitely no match for them. But the juvenile ones might be manageable. These juveniles were mostly in their first stage, with levels between 10 and 20. Even though he was only LV7, his body was relatively large for his species, and he understood type matchups. A fight wasn't out of the question. After all the primal beasts in this academy fought on pure instinct. Humans in this era didn't yet understand the concept of moves. They only gave broad commands like breathe fire, release electricity, attack, and defend. But Will knew about these moves in detail. He could even judge what kind of move an opponent was using by observing its actions and then counter it effectively. Good. That's the plan. Will nodded to himself in the water. He was starting to get back that feeling of surviving in the wild from his first life. The sensation made the primal beast genes in his body hum with a bit of excitement. I should prioritize finding water, fire, grass, and electric types to fight. And I can use the terrain to my advantage. Will's mind raced as he looked at the small lake he was in. He recalled the juvenile primal beasts he had seen that day and quickly picked out a few potential targets. Finding a primal beast with 2 of those 4 types was difficult, but there were plenty with just one. Having made his decision, he quietly submerged himself. He would rest today, calm his racing heart, and begin his conquest of the academy tomorrow. Will waited until evening, when Liz came to pick him up personally. On the carriage ride home from the academy, Liz held Will and gave him a few gentle kisses. The teachers at the academy told me you were very well behaved today. Good boy, Lan. Humph, let's see if you're still saying that tomorrow, Will smirked. An image had already formed in his mind, Liz, being approached by the primal beast scholars the next day with some very different news. Chapter 29, Arresting Lord Lan. The next day, Will returned to the academy. During a break, he lured a ponyta that was happily hopping around the plains over to the small lake. With the ponyta looking on in complete confusion, Will dove into the lake and then, from the water, launched a twister at it. The whirlwind, carrying a large amount of lake water, slammed into the ponyta's face, injuring it instantly. But this also enraged the ponyta. Ember. The ponyta opened its mouth and spat out specks of fire towards the lake's surface. Sizzle. The embers hit the water with a faint vaporizing sound. Will, hiding in the lake, took no damage at all. At most, he just felt the water get a little warmer. For the next few minutes, Will used his terrain advantage to continuously evade the ponyta's attacks. But the ponyta was a real hothead. Even after being beaten black and blue, it refused to run away and just kept glaring at the lake. Finally, the ponyta lost its temper. It recklessly charged at Will in the water with a tackle, only to plunge headfirst into the lake. It struggled frantically for less than 3 seconds before its eyes turned to swirls. Seeing this, Will's face went pale with fright. He quickly rushed over, wrapped his body around the ponyta, and dragged it onto the shore. You've got a rash nature, don't you? Will grumbled, then quickly carried the ponyta out of the woods and onto the plains. He knew someone was definitely keeping an eye on this area. Therefore, a beast scholar was bound to come running out to check on the fainted ponyta. Sure enough, less than a minute after he appeared on the plains with the ponyta, a beast scholar in a white coat came galloping over on a Tauros. Will couldn't help but shake his head as he looked at the 3-meter-tall Tauros. A Tauros of that size was like a monster. If it appeared in the future era of leagues, it would undoubtedly be the star of the show, perhaps only a legendary Pokémon could steal the spotlight from it. Strong, definitely LV40 or higher. Will couldn't judge the Tauros's exact strength, but based on his eye for power from his past life as a Beedrill, he could make a rough estimate. What happened here? Water? Did it fall in the water? The beast scholar dismounted, knelt, and felt the ponyta's wet coat, immediately understanding the situation. He quickly took out some kind of unknown root from his pocket, crushed it with his fingers, and stuffed it into the ponyta's mouth. Did Lord Lan save it? Lord Lan is such a good boy. What those other two scholars said wasn't right at all. After administering some simple first aid, the scholar turned to look at Will and praised him with a smile. He even took out a rare berry and offered it to him. These kinds of berries were usually reserved as rewards for beasts who performed exceptionally well. That's right, it was all my doing, Will nodded, quickly snatching the berry and turning to leave. Since the ponyta was fine for now, he needed to go find his next target. Will spent the next 3 days in the same manner. By the end of the 3rd day, he had beaten up every juvenile fire type in the academy. If he kept beating up the same ones, the experience he gained would most likely decrease. On the 4th day, upon arriving at the academy, Will first dove to the bottom of the lake to check his status screen. Dratini. Potential, blue. Level, 10. Type, dragon. Ability, shed skin. Height, 2.6 m. Weight, 4.5 kilograms. Moves, focus energy, inherited, wrap, leer, twister, thunder wave. Not bad. Gain 3 levels and learn thunder wave. Next up I'll take on the water types. Will had already made his decision. The remaining grass, water, and electric types were all about the same. Against grass and electric types, thunder wave's effect would be much weaker, but he could use the lake environment to his advantage. His movement speed on land was pitifully slow, he had to use this lake to fight Pokémon of a higher level. Against water types, he would lose his environmental advantage, but the paralyzing effect of thunder wave would be much stronger. Gulp. Gulp. Will suddenly heard the sound of drinking coming from above his head. He knew a Pokémon had come to the lake for a drink, so he swam up and poked his head out for a look. A dumb-looking Psyduck. A willing victim, Will grinned. He acted decisively. The white fins on his head flashed, and a faint yellow bolt of electricity shot out, hitting the still drinking Psyduck. Psyy. The Psyduck trembled for a few moments, and its head drooped into the water. Will pressed his advantage and moved in for another attack, not knowing that this was all a setup. It really is Lord Lan. I was wondering why so many beasts had been injured by falling into the water these past few days, and why they were all brought back by Lord Lan. Hiding behind a large tree at the edge of the forest, a beast scholar muttered to himself. For the past few days, he had thought Will was being a good Samaritan, saving those fire-type Pokémon. To reward him, he had even given him several rare and highly nutritious berries. But this was the truth. If they hadn't deliberately lured a Psyduck over to drink and test their theory, they would have remained in the dark. At first, they had considered that maybe Lord Lan just hated Pokémon that could create fire, but now it was clear that wasn't the case at all. Lord Lan was indiscriminately attacking other beasts. We can't let Lord Lan continue this unreasonable behavior. Although he doesn't kill them, these beasts often need to rest for several days and use up a lot of medicinal herbs. It not only delays their growth but also consumes our inventory, said another scholar next to him, watching the scene with a worried heart. When they organized battles, they were extremely careful. A fight didn't end only when one side was knocked out. Often, when one side had a clear advantage, they would call a halt to the match. This was to minimize injuries and the consumption of their herbal stock. The era of primal beasts was not the era of leagues, with its advanced medical equipment. The idea of just placing a Pokeball on a machine and having it heal in a few seconds didn't actually exist in the Pokémon world. At the very least, it would take a Nurse Joy and a Chansey a day or two of careful nursing to fully heal a Pokémon. The current stock of medicinal herbs at the Academy had been gathered by beast callers who risked their lives in the forest. They were extremely precious. The scholars did not want to waste them on cleaning up Will's messes. What do we do? What else can we do? We capture Lord Lan and let Queen Liz discipline him. It's not like we can do it ourselves, can we? The two of them conferred and decided on a plan. Arrest Lord Lan. We'll wait until Lord Lan defeats the yellow duck beast. When he's weakened, we'll make our move. Right. Chapter 30, Time for another spanking. When Liz saw the two beast scholars carrying Will into the palace caught in a giant net, she couldn't help but freeze. Did Lan beat up the other little ones again? Liz asked, a little uncertainly. She truly couldn't believe that the cute and docile Lan she knew could do such a thing. Besides, he looked so soft and harmless, with no fighting ability to speak of. How could he possibly beat anyone up? Humph! Will lay obediently in the net, putting on the air of a dead pig that doesn't fear boiling water. It wasn't that he hadn't struggled, he had been terrified when he was first caught. He had simply run out of energy and couldn't be bothered to struggle anymore. Yes, the two scholars said, nodding grimly. Sai, tell me what happened. It's like this. After the two scholars gave their detailed account, a strange expression appeared on Liz's face. Is this really the beast I chose? He's so clever. In truth, neither Liz nor the two scholars were particularly concerned about the fact that Will was attacking other beasts. A beast attacking another beast wasn't that the most normal of natural phenomena? Moreover, in their eyes, Will was a wild beast brought back from the wilderness, his wild instincts were bound to be stronger than others. This kind of behavior wasn't unheard of among the other Pokémon at the Academy, and it could always be corrected over time. But the intelligence Will displayed during these attacks was something they had never seen in other beasts. Even many experienced, older beasts might not be able to display such wisdom. Using the environment to target specific opponents, that was a strategy only a human should have been able to come up with. They had indeed taught such methods to the beasts in the Academy, but they had never taught them to Will. Lord Lan is truly an extraordinary beast. He not only possesses rare qualities but also has exceptional intelligence. If Lord Lan can evolve, I think he will be something truly incredible. The two scholars had originally come to complain, but as they spoke, they began to praise him. Listening to this, Liz couldn't help but feel a secret sense of satisfaction. She found that the scholars at the Academy had a keen eye and some real substance to them. Perhaps she should consider giving them a raise. Humph, so you know how to be respectful now? Where was this attitude when you were arresting me? Will thought, sniffing disdainfully as he watched the two men in front of Liz. After some discussion, the scholars left, and Will was ultimately returned to Liz's embrace. However, Liz didn't scold him right away. She held him as she sat back down at her desk to handle her official duties, while Will, bored out of his mind, curled up on her lap and dozed off. His only prize for the day was a single Psyduck, which was very disappointing. Only after Liz had finished her work did she carry Will back to the bedroom. You, she said, lying on the bed and gently pinching Will's nose, were not a good boy. Time for a spanking. Will nonchalantly presented his rear end. You little rascal. Liz didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She gave him 3 light, playful pats and that was the end of it. She would never actually hit him hard. And she was quite open-minded about his behavior at the Academy. If the kid wanted to fight, let him fight. It would increase his battle experience and abilities. Eventually, he'd pick a fight he couldn't win, get a beating, and probably learn his lesson then. But Liz was mistaken. Even if he got a beating, Will would not stop seeking out battles with other Pokémon. After all, he needed the experience. Alright, let's sleep. Be more careful at school tomorrow. Don't get caught again. Don't worry. Those two will never catch me again. The next day, at the end of the school day, Will was once again hauled before the Queen by the two scholars. Time for another spanking, Will thought, lying leisurely in the net and giving his tail an indifferent swish. This time, he didn't even bother to struggle when he was caught. Today's haul was 3 water-type Pokémon, which had raised his level again. He was very happy. Once his level was a bit higher, he could start picking opponents of other types and would no longer be limited to just water, fire, grass, and electric. With more opponents to challenge, the experience he could gain would naturally be greater. He felt that he wasn't far from evolving into a Dragonair. If things went quickly, it might only take a month and a half. Even if it was slow, he should have no problem evolving within 3 months. Liz and the netted Will looked at each other, and she let out a helpless sigh. Looking at this little rascal's attitude, she didn't know what to do with him. While she didn't really mind him fighting with other beasts at school, him being dragged back by the scholars every single day would eventually be seen by others. She couldn't even imagine what kind of rumors might start to spread. Liz took Will into her arms and sent the 2 scholars away. Although Will was still very light, only weighing 4.5 kilograms, his body was now 2.6 meters long. This length made it rather troublesome for Liz to hold him. Fortunately, Will was smart. He wrapped the lower half of his body around Liz's waist, which allowed her to easily hold his head. How are you so light, Lan? Liz asked, looking at the little head in front of her, a little curious. I don't know. It's just how the Dratini species is, I guess. Will couldn't possibly know the deeper biological secrets of a particular Pokémon species. Perhaps in the future, a Pokémon professor specializing in Dratini would figure it out. That girl Iris isn't going to class tomorrow. She's going to the academy with you. Remember to look after her, Liz continued, not understanding Will's words. What? You want me, a child, to look after that child? Will's eyes widened in shock. He wasn't worried about Iris getting hurt at the academy. Not only had the beasts there been domesticated to the point of losing their aggression, but the scholars themselves would never dare to let the little princess get injured. In the Dragonite Kingdom, not every child of the Dragonite clan could be called a prince or princess. Iris's status was special. She was the direct line youngest daughter of the blue-haired branch of the Dragonite clan, just as Liz had been for the red-haired branch. Therefore, as long as Iris was within the kingdom, it was almost impossible for her to get hurt, unless she was looking for trouble herself. It'll be fine. I know you'll take good care of Iris. Will rolled his eyes. He wasn't resisting because he was afraid she would get into trouble, but because he knew that if she followed him, she would absolutely cause trouble for him. Whatever. If something happens, the scholars can deal with it. I can't let it slow down my pace, Will decided. All right, I'll help you with your molt, and then it's time for bed. The next day arrived. Will opened his eyes and did not see Liz's face. This didn't surprise him. Liz was usually an early riser and would leave him in the room to sleep in until around 9, at which point he'd get up and go to the academy. But... Good morning, Lan. The face of the stoic, blue-haired little girl appeared before his eyes. That in itself wasn't the issue. The problem was that the stoic little girl had a baby bottle in her mouth. How dare you steal this baby's bottle? Chapter 31, Iris the Prodigy. The moment he was fully awake, Will shoved the baby bottle away. No matter how Hestia coaxed him, or even when she called Liz over to feed him personally, he refused to take a single sip. If it was someone else's, he wouldn't mind using it. But if it was originally his and someone else had used it, then he didn't want it anymore. It was tainted. Helpless, Hestia could only fetch a new bottle for Will. Only then did he reluctantly drink his breakfast milk. But because of this incident, his impression of Iris worsened. She was, in his opinion, a complete brat. At the Primal Beast Academy. Lan, where are you going? Stop following me. Will glanced at the little shadow trailing behind him. Iris had been stuck to him ever since she woke up this morning. If she were still strong enough to pick him up, she would definitely be clinging to him right now. In reality, he didn't particularly mind Iris following him. Although she was a bit of a brat, the thought that she liked him so much that she had such good taste naturally made him a little more patient. But if she followed him, the beast scholar bodyguards assigned to her would follow as well. How was he supposed to hunt under those conditions? Stop following me, Iris suddenly said, turning to the two beast scholars behind her. Will didn't think for a second that she had understood his words. Whether a Pokémon and a trainer could communicate was not something that depended on the feelings of just one party. It required mutual affection and trust. It was all about the bond. The bond. And setting aside how much Iris liked him, Will himself was not particularly fond of this stoic little brat. The Dragon Force also shouldn't grant its user the ability to understand the language of Dragon-type Pokémon. Therefore, Iris must have simply not wanted the two scholars following her. This one of the scholars said, looking troubled. Let's go, the other scholar said, pulling on his colleague's arm while pointing to the Pidgeot beside him. The hesitant scholar finally relented and left with him. Although the two men left, the Pidgeot remained, circling high in the sky, watching over Iris from above. All right, they're gone. You didn't want them following you, right, Lan? Will's eyes widened. He whipped his head around to stare at Iris. He didn't understand how she could have known what he was thinking. Could it be? Is this kid a psychic? Will thought, both shocked and testing her. If Iris really was a psychic, she would be able to hear his internal thoughts and would give a response. Was I right? I saw you leading me around in circles. I figured you didn't want to be followed, Iris said with a blank expression. She walked over to Will, squatted down, and hugged his head, giving it a nuzzle. Besides, I heard from my father that Lan spends his time at school beating up all the other beasts. You're a very energetic little guy. This little girl is actually pretty smart, Will thought, surprised. He truly couldn't tell that Iris was a clever child from looking at her expressionless face. Are you going to go fight other beasts now, Lan? Can I watch from the side? Then you can follow. Will frowned, thought for a second or two, and chose to compromise. His choice didn't really matter. Whether he agreed or not, Iris would have definitely followed him anyway. As for the Pidgeot in the sky, that wasn't a big problem. He doubted it would interfere in a battle between Pokémon. In this academy, only beasts that have entered their sub-adult stage can participate in battle training. This was a rule that only the human scholars knew. A Pidgeot wouldn't be able to distinguish such things. In its eyes, battling was probably a normal occurrence at this academy. Will led Iris all the way to his personal territory, the small lake. Come with me. Hide here and don't move. Will hooked the hem of Iris's dress with his tail and placed the little girl behind a thicket of bushes not far from the lake. You be careful, Lan. Iris was clever enough to guess the meaning behind his actions. Before he left, she hugged him and gave his nose a firm, sincere kiss for good luck. And in that very moment, Will suddenly felt the energy inside his body become a little more active. The feeling was like, I've been strengthened. Did this kid just unconsciously use the dragon force on me? Will stared at the little girl, who was just inches away, in total shock. He couldn't detect anything unusual on her face, she seemed completely unaware that she had just used the special power within her. It seemed she was just genuinely wishing for his safety. She can use the dragon force at the age of 8. This kid is a prodigy. Could it be that Liz isn't the protagonist of this era, but this child is? Will was dazed for a moment, but then he shook his head and turned to leave. This wasn't something worth investigating right now. With the time he had, it was better to take advantage of this buff and go fight a couple of Pokémon kids to rack up some experience. Iris obediently squatted behind the bushes and watched. She saw Will leave for a moment and then return with a jumping, yellow beast that had a sprout growing on its head. Iris didn't know it, but that Pokémon was called a Sunkern. It's kind of cute, but still not as cute as Lan, Iris muttered to herself from behind the bush. Outside, Will wasn't playing dirty this time. He had used dirty tricks and sneak attacks before because his level was too low and the gap between him and his opponents was too large. Without those tactics, he had no chance of winning. But now, his level wasn't that far off from theirs, and he had the bonus of the dragon force. There was no need for such methods. It was the same in his past life. Against enemies he couldn't beat, he would use a group beatdown to gain experience. Against enemies he had a chance of beating, he would fight them alone to monopolize all the experience. There was another reason. He suspected that victories won through dirty tricks yielded less experience than those won in a direct, 1v1 duel, probably about the same as when experience was split in a group fight. Will you battle with me? Will asked, issuing a challenge to the Sunkern beside him. Against the unruly Pokémon in the wild, it was best to just attack first. If you didn't, they would, and you would lose the initiative. But the academy was different, it had specific rules, much like in the era of leagues. If you didn't follow the rules, you would be ostracized. Just like the fire-type Pokémon he had beaten up a few days ago, who were now all hostile towards him. They wouldn't even accept a battle invitation. If he even got close, they would bare their teeth and hiss at him. To avoid a future where he couldn't find any opponents, Will decided to issue proper challenges from now on and fight fair and square. He would beat these Pokémon into submission, ensuring a renewable supply of opponents to harvest for EXP in the future. The Sunkern's expression became serious, and it nodded. It had accepted Will's challenge. Chapter 32, From now on, you're my number one henchman. With a final twister, one that was about 10% stronger than usual, Will successfully defeated the Sunkern. It had been a tough fight, as both sides were evenly matched. The Sunkern was a higher level, but Will had a slight type advantage and had been strengthened by the dragon force. However, although it was a tough fight, it wasn't exactly an exciting one. After all, at their current levels, both Will and the Sunkern had very limited move pools, making it impossible to have a spectacular duel. In the end, Will carried the Sunkern back to the plains to await pickup by the scholars. Lan. That was amazing. An excited Iris emerged from the bushes. Of course, Will didn't see the excitement on her face, he felt it. I have you to thank for it, Will said, his attitude towards Iris uncharacteristically better. He gently patted the little girl's head with his tail. Seriously, the Dragon Force was incredibly powerful. The boost it gave to Dragon-type Pokémon was immense, strengthening his Dragon-type moves by a full 10%. It was only because his current move pool was so shallow with Twister being his only Dragon-type move that the battle hadn't ended even sooner. "You're injured." Just as Iris was about to hug Will, she suddenly stopped. "Ugh, it's a small scratch," Will said, glancing down at his abdomen. He had been hit by the Sunken's razor leaf there, but it wasn't a big deal. Dragon types had a 2x resistance to grass type moves. Eating a couple of berries or applying some medicine would clear it up quickly. "Wait here for me," Iris said, then turned and ran off, disappearing somewhere. Will didn't intend to chase her. With his movement speed on land, he'd never catch up to her anyway. He did, however, notice that as Iris left, the strengthening power within his body gradually weakened and finally dissipated. A quarter of an hour later, Iris came jogging back, out of breath. In her hand was a small bottle of green ointment, which appeared to be an herbal remedy for external wounds. "Let me put this on for you, Lan." Iris squeezed out a little ointment and then gently spread it on Will's injury with her delicate index and middle fingers. Her movements were so gentle that it actually made Will feel a little ticklish. "That's enough. If you'd been 2 minutes slower, it would have healed on its own," Will said, wagging his tail to signal her to stop. He knew his own body. It wasn't a serious injury, and it was already mostly healed. "Quick, give me the buff. I'm going to fight again." Will raised his head and nudged it towards Iris. "What's wrong?" This time, however, Iris couldn't understand his meaning. She looked down at herself, wondering why Lan was suddenly so close. Did she have a strange smell? Never mind, Will had no choice but to give up. It seemed Iris couldn't freely control the special power within her. The boost he had received earlier was a complete coincidence. He led Iris back to the thicket where she had been hiding, then turned to select his next target. "Are you going to fight again, Lan? Don't you need to rest?" Iris reached out and grabbed the tip of Will's tail. "Don't grab the tip of my tail. It's very sensitive." Will shuddered, the sensation like getting goosebumps. The tip of a Dradane's tail was full of nerve endings, much like a human's lips, making it extremely sensitive. He flicked his tail in response. "Then you be careful," Iris said, her face full of worry. And as she spoke those words, the mysterious strengthening power once again appeared inside Will's body. Is the key to controlling the Dragon Force emotion? This time, Will noticed a clue. When Iris felt worried and hoped for his safety, she would unconsciously activate the Dragon Force to help him. But even if he figured this out, it was useless. He had no way of explaining it to her. He couldn't even read the written language of this world, let alone write it down. At most, he could try to guide her, first by making her aware of this special power inside her, and then by gradually teaching her how to use it. "Oh well, I'll deal with it later." Will thought for a moment and decided to give up on the idea for now. Iris wasn't his trainer, and he didn't see her every day. It wasn't worth the effort. He'd just let nature take its course. For the rest of the day, Will went on to challenge 3 more grass-type Pokémon. But after defeating the last one, he made an incredible discovery. He had leveled up. After defeating just 4 Pokémon, his level had gone from 11 to 12. This wasn't a game, leveling up wasn't that simple. Will had experienced this firsthand since being reborn in the Pokémon world. By his original estimate, he should have had to defeat 6 to 8 Pokémon to level up. If things went smoothly, that would have taken 2 days. If things didn't go smoothly, for example, if he was seriously injured in a battle and needed a long rest, it could have taken 3 or even 4 days. But now, that process had been shortened to a single day. On the carriage ride home, Will was completely baffled. Could it be you? Finally, he had no choice but to turn his gaze to Iris's face. The little girl was already exhausted and had fallen fast asleep, leaning against him. She was likely more tired than usual from using the Dragon Force so much. Otherwise, an 8-year-old child, who should be full of energy, wouldn't be this sleepy just from watching some Pokémon battles. It has to be the Dragon Force. Will couldn't think of any other possibility. The only thing different about today compared to the last 2 days was that Iris had been buffing him all day. It was only then that Will seemed to remember. In his past life, he had definitely read online that the Dragon Force could accelerate the growth of Dragon-type Pokémon. But no one could ever explain exactly how it worked. Was it a direct or indirect acceleration? Indirect, probably. Will was inclined to believe the latter. After all, if it were the former, then the Dragon Force, which he considered a T3 or even T4 tier ability, would shoot straight up to T1. Directly accelerating the growth of a dragon type was simply too broken. The Dragon Force, combined with a late-blooming dragon-type Pokémon, the combination was just insane. So, Will preferred the theory that the Dragon Force increased the experience a dragon-type Pokémon gained from battle. If that was the case, from now on, you're my number one henchman. Besides Liz, we're the best of friends. Will affectionately nuzzled the little blue-haired girl leaning against him. Seeing him now, it was hard to imagine that just this morning, he had been giving her the cold shoulder for stealing his baby bottle. Chapter 33, War Begins. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed since Will started at the Primal Beast Academy. He had now fully adapted to his identity and daily life as a Dratini. His movements in the water were incredibly fast, swifter than most ordinary water-type Pokémon. Of course, that was only the smallest of the changes. The larger ones were clearly visible on his status screen. Dratini. Potential, Blue. Level, 25. Type, Dragon. Ability, Shed Skin. Height, 3.7 m. Weight, 7 kilograms. Moves, Focus Energy, Inherited, Wrap, Leer, Twister, Thunder Wave, Dragon Tail, Agility, Slam. The one thing Will was unsatisfied with was his leveling speed. He had underestimated the difficulty of raising a dragon-type Pokémon. With each level, the experience required seemed to nearly double. It was absurd. Over the past month, for about 7 or 8 days, Will had brought Iris with him while he trained, using the little girl's Dragon Force to enhance his power and accelerate his growth. Yet even with that boost, his level had only just reached 25. The closer he got to the LV30 threshold, the more anxious he became, unable to calm down. His molting speed was becoming more and more frequent. He was now molting 5 times every 2 days, which annoyed him to no end. He just wanted to hurry up and evolve into a Dragonair. Not only would he gain the ability to fly, but the frequency of his molting would also drop significantly. Life would become much more comfortable then. Aside from his leveling speed, Will was very satisfied with everything else. His height and weight, in particular, had already exceeded the Pokédex values by more than double, which was a sign of healthy development. Of course, it was because he was too healthy and his diet was too nutritious that his molting frequency had increased so dramatically. Arriving at the Primal Beast Academy again, Will wriggled his long body across the plains. Times had changed. Many of the Pokémon he had beaten up before now came over to greet him. These were the ones he had defeated in fair fights, and they respected his strength, holding no grudges. But they could not become his followers. Because they were not of the same species, they could not feel a true sense of admiration and recognition for a stronger being from another clan. As for his territory, it was still the same small lake in the corner. The larger lakes on the plains were occupied by several sub-adult Pokémon above LV30, and he couldn't beat them yet. For now, among the Pokémon below LV30 at the academy, basically none were his match. He had become the undisputed top dog of the juvenile group. However, likely because of his size, the scholars at the academy had already classified him as part of the adolescent group. In terms of level, he did qualify. But in terms of the Dragonite line's growth stages, he was still a bona fide member of the juvenile group. Only after evolving into a Dragonair would he be an adolescent. But he knew this, and the beast scholars did not. Will was the first Dratini they had ever seen. They naturally wouldn't know that he was still in his first stage. And Will felt this wasn't necessarily a bad thing. This misunderstanding allowed him to enter the sub-adult group's roster earlier, letting him fight more suitable and stronger Pokémon to gain more experience. He guessed that many people, seeing his massive size but lack of evolution, were beginning to suspect that he was a Pokémon with no evolved form. Many were probably starting to feel sorry for Liz. They believed that a Pokémon with no evolution was one with limited potential and wouldn't be very strong in the future. However, Liz and Iris paid no mind to these rumors. In fact, they would be thrilled if Will had no evolved form. They had seen other cute Pokémon evolve into forms that were difficult to describe. If Will were to become ugly after evolving, they would rather he stay in his current form forever. Liz had even had a dream about Will evolving, which she personally referred to as a nightmare. And as Will grew larger and larger, she often felt a sense of anxiety about this. It was inevitable. But Will would certainly not stop his path to power just for the sake of looks. If this were the era of leagues, he might consider it. But this was the era of primal beasts. Just because the war hadn't arrived yet didn't mean it wouldn't. As the Queen's Pokémon, being too weak would be a disgrace. He had a lot to consider. Besides, many Pokémon traded their looks for strength. The Dragonite line was already quite good in that regard. Dratini was maxed out on cuteness. Dragonair was a little less cute but looked more beautiful and elegant, even a bit divine. As for Dragonite, it was goofy and cute. Its looks couldn't be called bad either. Starting today, I'll challenge the sub-adult Pokémon. I'll test the waters with some of the weaker ones first. It was another unremarkable day of battle. He was starting to get tired of this daily routine of fighting. If he could, he hoped his next life would be in the era of leagues, where he could live a life of lazy relaxation. Returning to the palace in the evening, Will noticed that Liz wasn't at the door to greet him as usual. He sensed that something might have happened. He shook off Hestia, who was about to take him to dinner, and went to the main office by himself. Crash! He rammed the office door open. The moment he entered, he saw Liz frowning, a heavy, irresolvable sorrow on her face. Lan, you're back. Liz knew it was Will without even looking up. In the entire palace, only Will and an angry Hestia would open a door like that. Seeing her precious Lan return, Liz's expression softened slightly. What's wrong? You look like you just ate a bitter melon, Will said, slithering over to Liz's side. He wound his way up her long legs, wrapping most of his body around her, and finally poked his head out from beside her neck to look at the desk. On the desk was a letter. It didn't have many words, but unfortunately, Will couldn't recognize a single one. He didn't know if it was because the script of this era was ancient or if the Pokémon world had its own unique writing system, but he couldn't understand it at all. It wasn't just that it wasn't Chinese, it wasn't any language he had ever seen on Earth. It's nothing. You don't need to know, Lan. Liz could understand Will's intent. She couldn't understand his specific words, but she could now somehow sense the meaning behind them. Liz didn't know why, but the beast scholars had told her it meant her bond and affection with Lan had grown deeper. What do you mean I don't need to know? Tell me right now. Annoyed, Will widened his eyes and tickled Liz's stomach with his tail. Ah ha ha ha, stop. I can't take it. I'll tell you, Liz laughed, swatting at his tail. She looked at the letter on the desk, her expression growing complicated. Last month, our people from the Dragonite Kingdom and people from the Kingdom of the Land met in a valley. They had a conflict over a field of wild medicinal herbs. I didn't pay it much mind at first. I didn't think we'd have any further dealings with this Kingdom of the Land. But I was wrong. The new King of the Land Kingdom is very ambitious. He wants to cross the MT Silver Range and conquer the entire Dragonite Kingdom. He has repeatedly sent small teams to infiltrate our territory and gather intelligence. War is probably about to begin. Chapter 34, Conquer Them. Don't worry, nothing will happen to you, Will said, comforting Liz as he saw her worried expression. His words were not without basis. 1,000 years from now, the Dragonite clan would still be living peacefully in the Johto region. What major disaster could possibly befall them? No matter how long the Dragonite kingdom survived in this era of primal beasts, even in the worst-case scenario, the seeds of their lineage would continue. As for Liz herself, once he evolved into a Dragonite, or even just a Dragonair, he would have the power to fly her away from any battlefield. She would definitely be safe. I'm not worried about my own safety. It's just that Liz's face was full of bitterness, but she ultimately didn't share the depths of her sorrow with Will. In her eyes, Lan was just a baby, a little over a month old, and a beast at that. How could he possibly understand her feelings? But as a transmigrator, how could Will not know what she was thinking? He had never been the ruler of a nation and couldn't truly empathize with Liz's current position, but he had seen plenty of similar cases. The outcome of war was always one of two things. Either one side was conquered, or the politicians from both sides eventually shook hands, the merchants returned home rich, and the mothers wept at grave sites. With the Dragonite Kingdom and the Kingdom of the Land being of roughly equal strength, the outcome was plain to see. They would likely fight for a few years, or a dozen, and in the end, the two monarchs would sign a truce, rebuild their strength, and a few decades later, a new war would break out. Right now, Liz didn't want to go to war, but she was helpless. If the King of the Land was determined to invade, the Dragonite Kingdom could not just sit and wait for death. The Kingdom of the Land practices slavery. The common people have no human rights to speak of. I cannot allow the citizens of the Dragonite Kingdom to fall into such a state. So what do you want to do? Will shifted his gaze to stare at Liz. This question was very important. Liz's answer would determine his own plans for the foreseeable future. It seems their intention to start a war is very firm. What do you think, Lan? Liz tilted her head slightly, meeting Will's eyes. Since they're so eager to die, then we'll just conquer them, Will said, a subtle, fierce light glinting in his large black eyes, making him look almost demonic. He had never been a king, had no desire to be one, and didn't particularly care if the people of the Dragonite Kingdom lived well or not. So, he wouldn't consider things from as many angles as Liz. His logic was simple: when someone comes to pick a fight, if you don't have the strength, fine. But if you do, he had no intention of just swallowing the insult. It seems that's the only way. Liz's crimson eyes grew firm. If she had to make the decision on her own, she might have hesitated for a few more days. But since even Lan thought the same way she did, there was nothing left to hesitate about. To achieve a longer-lasting peace, we must conquer the kingdom of the land. Liz nodded, then reached out and patted Will's head. You should go to sleep. I have a lot to think about tonight. No need. I'll stay with you, Will said, slithering down from Liz's body. He rested most of his body on the floor, leaving only his head resting on her lap. Times had changed. He now weighed 7 kilograms. While not excessively heavy, it would still be a strain for Liz if he was wrapped around her all the time. I need to speed up my leveling. Also, I need to increase the security around Liz, Will thought to himself. He didn't want to think too much about matters concerning the entire kingdom, that was Liz's job. He only needed to consider how to protect her. As for his suggestion to conquer the kingdom of the land, it wasn't just empty talk. It was difficult for a single Pokémon to stand against an army of a million, unless it was a legendary Pokémon with the power to manipulate the laws of reality. But in this early stage of the kingdom period, the battles between the two nations would involve at most 100,000 people, and the number of beasts would be even smaller. Will didn't need to reach the level of a legendary Pokémon. If I have the strength of a champion, no, even just an Elite 4 level Pokémon, that would be enough to ensure the Dragonite Kingdom's victory. Will opened his status screen and considered it. Elite 4 level strength meant his level needed to be 70 or higher. I wonder if I can reach that within 5 years. Will was not very optimistic. In the anime, it seemed like a character could go from LV5 to LV80 in a few months and challenge the champion, but that was for the sake of the plot. The anime was also full of characters who had spent 50, 60, or even 80 years trying and still couldn't reach that level. So, Will felt it would be a real challenge for him to reach the level of an Elite Four's Pokémon within 5 years. He also didn't know how long the war would last. In the history of his past life on Earth, wars had lasted from a few minutes to over 1,000 years. He could only do it as fast as possible. Liz can't just have me as her only Pokémon. When I'm on the battlefield or out training, she can't be left without protection. Will remembered that when he first met Liz as a queen, she had a few large Beedrill with her. But he later learned that their relationship was not that of a trainer and her Pokémon. It was more like a partnership. Liz provided the Beedrill with enough food and a safe environment to grow their swarm, and in return, the Beedrill would act as guards or warriors when necessary. In a truly critical situation, the Beedrill would abandon Liz and flee on their own. I have to put Liz on the path of a trainer. I need to find her a few more suitable Pokémon to raise. Will finalized his plan. Most people thought raising beasts was risky. After all, who knew if a beast would suddenly go berserk and kill its master? So, unless someone was exceptionally brave, no one would keep multiple beasts by their side. But Will thought their worries were excessive. Pokémon weren't demons practicing dark arts, nor were they simple animals. Why would they suddenly go berserk for no reason? Even if something was wrong with them, their first instinct would be to get away from their trainer to avoid hurting them. You could see that from how Ash's Pikachu acted when its static electricity went out of control. Besides, he was here, wasn't he? So, raising multiple Pokémon would only be beneficial for Liz. With the resources she possessed, it would be a piece of cake. And with him, a transmigrator, to guide her, the speed at which those Pokémon leveled up would certainly not be slow. Once I evolve into a Dragonair, I'll go to MT Silver and catch a few Pokémon for Liz, Will nodded, feeling pleased with his own cleverness. When the time came for the final, decisive battle, the king of the opposing kingdom would pull out one Pokémon, while Liz would pull out 10 high-level Pokémon, a comprehensive battle team with various combat roles and types. Just imagine their opponent's fear. At this thought, Will happily nudged Liz's thigh with his soft, large nose. What is it? Mew, I'll protect you. Hee, yes, I know. And I'll protect you too, Lan. Chapter 35, Sakaki the White. On the other side of MT Silver, opposite the Dragonite Kingdom, lay the Kingdom of the Land, a nation that had already unified all the tribes of the Kanto region. This kingdom was founded 10 years ago, around the same time as the Dragonite Kingdom. At that time, however, its royal family was the Sylph clan. The system of slavery in the Kingdom of the Land was also established by the Sylphs. The second king, Sakaki the White, merely continued this system. But although both kings used slavery, the public's reaction to their rule was completely different. Under the rule of the Sylph clan, the treatment of humans was worse than that of beasts. Commoners who made mistakes were even fed to primal beasts as punishment, while members of the Sylph clan could commit wrongs and remain perfectly safe. Over time, the Sylphs naturally incurred the wrath of the people. So, when Sakaki the White raised the banner of rebellion, countless people immediately answered his call and followed in his footsteps. The first thing Sakaki did after taking power was to publicly execute every single member of the Sylph clan. This act not only won him the hearts of the people but also demonstrated his methods and style, inspiring awe and fear in many. Under Sakaki's rule, although slavery remained, he had learned from the Sylph's experience and amended some of the specific laws, improving the kingdom's situation considerably. At the very least, humans could now live with some dignity. Most importantly, with the previous Sylph clan as a point of comparison, Sakaki appeared far more benevolent. Furthermore, no one except Sakaki himself enjoyed any special privileges. The only way to obtain them was through meritorious deeds. On this point, everyone in the Kingdom of the Land was equal. In the capital of the Kingdom of the Land, another morning dawned. Bzz. Sakaki the White opened his eyes to the sound of his beast partner. Good morning, Beedrill, Sakaki said. He took a sip of water, then rubbed the head of the Pokémon beside him. Sakaki's partner was a Beedrill, and the name he had given it was simply Beedrill. In this world, Sakaki trusted no one except himself and his partner. This was evident from the fact that he allowed the Beedrill to sleep in the same room with him. In his youth, his mother had been gravely ill, and his family was too poor to afford a doctor or medicine. With no other choice, he had ventured into MT Silver alone, searching for treasures to sell or herbs he could use. Just as he discovered a rare herb and was about to pick it, he was attacked by a Rattata. He had trespassed on its territory. His leg was bitten, and he was unable to run, left to sit paralyzed on the ground. Just as Sakaki thought he was going to die, a fat Weedle appeared and entered a standoff with the Rattata. In the end, wary of each other, they did not fight. At that moment, Sakaki did not feel the relief of escaping death. He only felt that he had just left a wolf's den to enter a tiger's lair. But the Weedle's target was not him, it was the medicinal herbs in the bamboo basket on his back. Many of them were poisonous, which made them a fine delicacy for a Weedle. The intelligent Sakaki realized the Weedle's goal and quickly emptied the basket, leaving only the few herbs that could alleviate his mother's pain. This very act unexpectedly won the Weedle's favor. The young Sakaki was an ambitious and ruthless person. Seeing that the Weedle had no intention of attacking him, he made the decision to secretly raise it. That was roughly 19 years ago. The people of the Sylph tribe had not yet begun to emulate the Dragonite tribe in harnessing the power of beasts, but Sakaki had already begun to quietly raise one. This was an incredibly bold move for a human in this era. In terms of sheer audacity, it was perhaps second only to Liz's expedition deep into MT Silver to find the Beedrill swarm. And so, Sakaki secretly raised the Weedle for 14 years. Then, with the power of his Beedrill, he seized the throne. The royal guards and their beast collars were like cannon fodder in front of his Beedrill, unable to last even 10 seconds. Now, another 5 years had passed. Only Sakaki himself knew how powerful his Beedrill had become. After washing up, Sakaki, his hair slicked back, made his way to his office. The first thing that caught his eye was a document detailing the recent conflict between the resource-gathering team and the people of the Dragonite Kingdom near MT Silver. Humph, Sakaki snorted, a smirk playing on his lips. This was no accidental encounter. Years ago, he had learned about the Dragonite Kingdom from the remnants of the Sylph clan. He also knew that the Sylphs and the Drago Knights had been engaged in a long-running war over MT Silver for decades. Since he had exterminated the Sylph clan, this war had become one between his Kingdom of the Land and the Drago Knight Kingdom. Neither kingdom could afford to lose the mineral and herbal resources of MT Silver. These resources were vital for both their military and their medicine. Any nation that wished to endure would fight for this natural gold mine at its doorstep. But Sakaki and Liz were different. Liz only wanted MT Silver. She initially had no intention of conquering the Kingdom of the Land because she did not want to start a war. Sakaki, however, wanted the entire land. MT Silver was just a tiny piece in his grand ambitions. As for the people and beasts who might die in this war, he couldn't care less. Sakaki sat for a while before summoning his subordinate. Boss Sakaki. The man who entered was a giant, standing a full 2.3 meters tall. His build was as robust as a standing water buffalo. His name was Ares, and he was one of the first to follow Sakaki the White, as well as one of the 4 generals of the Kingdom of the Land. Back before Sakaki had become king, Ares had always called him boss, and he continued to do so now. Sakaki had never corrected him. He felt the title strengthened his relationship with his 4 generals and helped him win their loyalty. Yes. How is your Iron Chunk's strength these days? Sakaki asked, looking up with concern. He remembered that Ares's Pokémon's new form resembled a bipedal rhinoceros, its entire body as hard as if it were wearing iron armor. It looked incredibly powerful. But Sakaki still trusted his own Beedrill's twin stingers more. He's full of vigor. Much stronger than before, Ares nodded with a hint of pride. His Pokémon had originally been a Rehorn, which he had raised for a very long time. Ares was a proud man. While others started by raising small beasts because it felt safer, Ares was different. In his eyes, those small beasts were like mice. He disliked them and had never raised one. This had once been a headache for Sakaki. His other men were unwilling to be commanded by an ordinary human without a beast, but Sakaki didn't trust anyone else as much as Ares. Fortunately, one night 5 or 6 years ago, an injured Radon had stormed into the kingdom's territory and happened upon Ares, who was leading a patrol. Ares was a beast himself. He single-handedly took on the Radon with his bare hands, wrestling it to the ground. He was greatly impressed by the Radon's immense power and thick hide. He was certain this was the powerful beast he had been searching for. So, he helped it recover, fed it personally, and spent the nights telling it of his grand ambitions. Finally, through a combination of emotion and reason, he managed to tame the dopey-looking Radon. Ares had high hopes for it, bestowing upon it the name Iron Chunk. In his view, there was nothing in the world harder than an iron chunk. Ares had originally thought his Radon was in its final stage. He never expected it to be able to evolve again. That had been a pleasant surprise. Chapter 36, Evolution. A double blessing. Boss Sakaki, should I lead the troops and conquer the Drago Knight Kingdom in one fell swoop? Ares asked, his gaze burning as he looked at Sakaki, his eyes filled with a fiery battle lust. He looked like a true warmonger. Don't underestimate the Drago Knight Kingdom. Besides, we need to handle our own internal affairs first, Sakaki said, shaking his head dismissively. The Drago Knight Kingdom had begun to command beasts long before the Sylph Kingdom had. Moreover, his own Kingdom of the Land had been greatly weakened by the civil war 5 years ago, and there were still remnants of the old regime hiding among the populace. Sakaki was still in the process of hunting these people down. He didn't want a bunch of traitors stabbing him in the back or leaking intelligence to the enemy when a major war broke out. In terms of military strength, the Kingdom of the Land was certainly not stronger than the Drago Knight Kingdom. The only thing he was sure of was that his own personal strength was definitely greater than that of the Drago Knight Kingdom's queen. After all, he had heard that she had only started raising her own Pokémon a little over a month ago. Heh, Sakaki couldn't help but chuckle at the thought. She had started raising Pokémon nearly 20 years later than him. On what grounds could she possibly contend with him? Sakaki even dared to boast that if he gave Liz another 5 years, he could still crush her with ease. Such was the confidence of the king of the land. All right. Then what about MT Silver? Send more teams in. Just maintain the friction with the Drago Knight Kingdom, but don't let a major conflict break out. Yes, sir. You may leave. Watching Ares depart, Sakaki stood up and walked to the window. The sky outside was a hazy grey, and specks of white light were falling from the dark clouds. Beedrill, he said. It's snowing. Drago Knight Kingdom, Primal Beast Academy. Today seemed to be another unremarkable day. But only Will knew that this day was anything but ordinary. A month had passed since the day Liz had decided to conquer the kingdom of the land. During this month, his leveling speed had dropped sharply, his progress becoming extremely slow. Especially after reaching LV30, he had gone through at least 30 or 40 battles but still hadn't leveled up. It was as if he had hit a bottleneck. Will couldn't figure out the reason for the sudden drop in speed. From his perspective, his daily routine hadn't changed at all, and his little tool, Iris, had always been available. In the end, he could only attribute it to his body accumulating the energy required for evolution. I haven't molted in 3 days. It should be today. Will lay quietly in his small lake. Iris had a lot of lessons today and wasn't by his side. Otherwise, with her personality, she would have been following him around like a shadow. Ever since he had stopped molting 3 days ago, he sensed that he was on the verge of evolving. And the feeling of internal heat he remembered from before his evolution into a Beedrill had suddenly appeared when he woke up this morning. The water temperature has dropped quite a bit. Suddenly, Will noticed that the lake's temperature seemed to have fallen. He curiously surfaced and poked his head out to look. Unfortunately, with the tree canopy above, he couldn't see what the weather was like. Will crawled out of the lake, slithered to the plains outside the small forest, and looked up at the sky, momentarily lost in a daze. "It's snowing," Will said, a puff of white, cold air gently escaping his mouth. It was the first time he had seen snow since coming to this world. Suddenly, a shiver ran through Will's body. As a human, he quite liked snowy days, but as a dragon-type Pokémon, his body did not seem to share the sentiment. Ah! Will's mind decided to fight against his body's instincts. Not only did he not retreat into the lake, but he instead opened his mouth wide and ate the snowflakes falling from the sky. After about 5 seconds. "Pfft, what am I doing?" Will was amused by his own actions and couldn't help but shake his head. But the next moment, his eyes widened. He felt an icy sensation in his throat, as if a large mass of cold air had suddenly appeared there. However, before he could even spit out the cold air, his body began to transform. A pure white light began to radiate from all over his body. Then, the very shape of his body began to change. Not only that, but most crucially, his body, now covered in white light, began to float into the air. Yang! A beautiful, song-like cry echoed across the sky. An elegant, magnificent, and even somewhat divine-looking Pokémon appeared in the heavens. "I've finally evolved. Ahaha pft pft pft." Realizing what had happened, Will was overcome with ecstasy. But halfway through his laugh, the cold energy gathered in his throat suddenly erupted. A spray of frosty white mist, filled with tiny ice crystals, shot from his mouth, instantly coating the grass below with a thin layer of frost. This is Will didn't think twice and immediately opened his personal status screen. Dragonair. Potential, purple. Level, 31. Type, dragon. Ability, shed skin. Height, 9 m. Weight, 38 kilograms. Moves, focus energy, inherited, wrap, leer, twister, thunder wave, dragon tail, agility, slam, icy wind. Not only did I evolve, but I also learned a new ice-type move. I'm practically a god. In that moment, Will was happier than he had ever been. Over 2 long months. No one but him knew how frustratingly he had passed these last 2 months. Today, that small lake could no longer confine him. The world was vast, and he could go anywhere. Ying ying ying. Will happily used the power within him to manipulate the weather, soaring freely through the sky and letting out a series of joyous cries. A dragonair flies by using this very power to command the wind. After about 2 minutes of joyful frolicking, Will gradually came to a stop. "Wow, I'm huge." He stared blankly at the body data on his status screen. The Pokédex stated that a dragonair's length and weight were 4 meters and 16.5 kilograms, respectively. He was more than double that. It was simply absurd. At this length, he could completely rival that giant onyx from the plains. "That's right, I have to go show Liz. She'll be so happy," Will thought, and immediately flew out of the Primal Beast Academy. Now that he had the ability to fly, he could go wherever he wanted. So what if he was clumsy on the ground? He could fly. Along the way, Will didn't fly very high, so many people witnessed his flight. When the 2 scholars at the academy stared blankly as he flew out, their minds couldn't even process it for a moment. Do we have a beast like that at our academy? I don't know, it's my first time seeing it. But don't you think its form and color look a lot like Lord Lan? Could it be? Lord Lan has evolved. The two scholars' eyes widened. When they looked up again, Will's figure had already disappeared. Thinking back on the beautiful form they had just seen, they were filled with an indescribable shock. Her Majesty Liz has such a good eye. Indeed. So cute as a baby, and still so beautiful after evolving. And it looks so powerful. The two scholars' voices and eyes were filled with envy. But they didn't take any particular action. There was no need. They knew that the news of Lord Lan's evolution, and his beautiful new form, would soon spread throughout the entire Dragonite Kingdom. Chapter 37, The Most Beautiful Beast. In the capital of the Dragonite Kingdom, many people on the streets saw Will as he flew through the sky. Whose beast is that? So pretty, so beautiful. It feels a bit divine, like the dragons described in the legends. It's so big, it must be very strong. Doesn't it look a little familiar? It's like humans are, without a doubt, visual creatures. They often judge a being's goodness or strength based on its appearance. If they encountered a ferocious-looking beast like a Nidoking, Onyx, or Radon, they would definitely keep their distance at once, even though they knew that any beast appearing in the capital most likely had an owner. These beasts wouldn't harm people without reason, but the people couldn't help their innate fear. But when faced with a dragonair of such exceptional beauty, they could only stop and stare in awe. Will, flying through the sky, paid no mind to what the people below were thinking. He just wanted to fly to the palace as quickly as possible and see the look on Liz's face when she saw him. In the palace, Hestia, passing through a second-floor corridor, seemed to catch something in her peripheral vision. She turned her head to look out the window. Is that Lord Lan? Hestia's expression was one of shock at first, but she quickly calmed down. She was different from the common folk, after all. For the past 2 months, Hestia had been responsible for feeding Will and waking him up at least half the time. With her familiarity, she could naturally recognize at a glance that this was the evolved Will, not some strange new beast. Besides, the appearance of a Dratini and a Dragonair wasn't drastically different. The main changes were in size and some physical details, but it was still easy to see that Dragonair was the evolved form of Dratini. If Will had started as a Magikarp or a Phoebus, Hestia might not have been able to recognize him. Lord Lan has evolved? How beautiful! Oh, right, I must tell Lady Liz at once. Hestia stared at the soaring Will, a gasp of admiration escaping her lips. But she quickly snapped back to her senses and began to run towards Liz's office. In the study. Knock, knock. Enter, Liz's gentle voice sounded, and she looked up towards the door. Lady Liz, Lord Lan has returned, Hestia said, rushing in, slightly out of breath. Why is he back so early today? Did that child skip school again? Liz frowned. She remembered that it wasn't time for school to be out yet. This reminded her of an incident a few days ago. Iris had been scolded by her tutor, had run crying to the academy, and had convinced Lan to run away with her. The two little ones had hidden under a stone bridge in the city for a whole day before being found by the royal guard. That day, Liz had given both of them a firm spanking. No, my lady. Lord Lan, he's evolved. He flew here. What? Hearing this, Liz shot up from her chair with a whoosh. She casually took off the glasses on her face, tossed them onto the desk, and, lifting the hem of her dress, ran towards the palace exit. Hestia sighed helplessly and could only start running to catch up. But to her surprise, she found she couldn't keep up with Liz. While she was a little tired, she was at least wearing flat shoes. Liz was wearing heels that were at least 8 centimeters high, yet she was running so fast. Liz rushed out of the palace and immediately looked up at the sky. The noble, elegant figure in the heavens was descending towards her. Lan. Liz recognized him at a glance. At the same time, an expression of delighted surprise appeared on her face. Her greatest fear was that Lan would become ugly after evolving. But now, it seemed his good looks were still on point. He had simply transitioned from cute to beautiful, and was still utterly captivating. Ying! Liz! Seeing Liz, Will immediately flew towards her. Unfortunately, he could no longer just shove his head into her embrace like he did as a Dratini. The small, round pearl on his forehead had become a cute little horn upon evolution. This horn was quite hard and might hurt Liz. So, he could only land on the ground and let her find an angle to get close without getting poked. Lan, you've changed so much. Liz walked up to him, tilted her head back, stood on her tiptoes, and wrapped her arms around Will's neck. Will was very tall now. Even with 2/3 of his body coiled on the ground, he still stood nearly 3 meters high. Liz herself was not short, with a height of over 1.7 meters, but even on her tiptoes, she couldn't touch the top of his head. Is it okay? I'm just a bit bigger, Will said, lowering his body as much as possible so Liz could more easily observe his new form. In his opinion, the difference between a Dragonair and a Dratini wasn't that great. Let me get a good look at you. Liz guided Will's head in front of her, blinking her light red eyes as she carefully examined him. The guards and maids in the palace courtyard couldn't help but focus their gazes on the pair. They couldn't help it. A Dragonair's beauty was just that high. It gave off the illusion of being constantly shrouded in a divine aura. They couldn't stop themselves from looking at him. If you were to ask which was the most majestic beast in the entire Dragonite kingdom, they might argue. But if you were to ask which was the most beautiful, they would now all answer, Lord Lan. In the entire Kanto and Johto regions, excluding legendary Pokémon, there was only one that could compare with a Dragonair in terms of beauty, Ninetales. And for a Vulpix to evolve into a Ninetales, it needed a fire stone. It was rare to see a Ninetales in the wild, and the Dragonite kingdom didn't even know of its existence. As for Melodic, Gardevoir, Alolan Ninetales, Serperior and Sylveon, these beasts, whose beauty could rival or even surpass a Dragonair's, were mostly found in other regions. They were rare even in the era of Leagues Kanto and Johto, let alone the current era of primal beasts. Therefore, at this stage in the Dragonite kingdom, no other beast could compete with Will in the looks department. The little white fins on the side of your head have become little wings. Is that how you fly, Lan? Your little nose is gone. What a shame, I loved pinching it. So the little bump on your face was just a horn that hadn't grown in yet. What's this little blue pearl under your neck? It's cool to the touch. You have 2 on your tail, too. Liz held Will, touching and looking at him from every angle, endlessly curious. She seemed determined to find every single change in his body. At the same time, her heart couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet loss. Although the Dragonair was beautiful, it certainly wasn't as cute as the Dratini had been, which made Liz a little sad. She would never be able to pinch Lan's little nose again. Liz, let me take you for a flight, Will said, happily flicking his tail. He was still giddy from his evolution and wanted to show off his flying ability to Liz. No sooner said than done. Without another word, Will used his long body to scoop Liz up and coil her onto his back, behind his neck. Lan, what are you doing? Liz was startled by his actions. She subconsciously hugged his neck tightly, which was exactly what Will wanted. The next moment, he shot up into the sky with Liz, heading towards the grey, overcast heavens. Lady Liz! Hestia's belated scream echoed from below, but it was too late. She could no longer stop him. Chapter 38, A Match Made in Heaven. Eek! The scream right next to his ear left Will speechless. Why is she acting less brave than when she was a kid? Will clearly remembered flying with Liz on his back when he was a Beedrill. Back then, Liz wasn't scared at all, she was incredibly bold. Lan! Don't fly so fast! And a little lower, be good. Liz's voice trembled as she reached out to stroke the blue pearl on Will's neck, trying to soothe him. A ticklish sensation spread from his neck, making Will shake his head uncomfortably. However, he still lowered his altitude and slowed his speed. Only then did Liz let out a breath of relief, her emotions calming down a bit. It had been a very long time since she had flown in the sky. The last time was 20 years ago, when she was escaping with Goldie. Phew, this is the first time I've looked down on the Dragonite Kingdom from this angle. Everyone is looking at us. After calming down, Liz looked below. The people of the capital were all looking up in surprise at Liz and Will in the sky. So that beast is one that Lady Liz raised. I knew it. Only Lady Liz is worthy of such a beautiful beast. They look so good together. It's like a match made in heaven. Yes, the beautiful queen and the beautiful beast. The people in the city couldn't help but buzz with discussion. Feeling their gazes, Liz couldn't help but smile, a sense of pride welling up in her heart. That's right, this beautiful Lan is my partner. Everyone, be as envious as you like. Liz leaned forward and hugged Will's body tightly. Specks of snowflakes landed on her, making her shiver slightly. Let's fly up a little higher, Will said, increasing his altitude. Slowly, now, Liz said, feeling him ascend. This time she didn't panic. She trusted that Lan wouldn't let anything happen to her, she just wasn't used to this height. Liz, look. We're inside a cloud. Wow, I caught a cloud. Liz couldn't resist reaching out a hand to grasp the cloud that was right beside her. In that moment, she seemed to transform back into the lively little girl from 20 years ago. Higher and higher they went, until they broke through the cloud layer. Both Will and Liz's breath caught in their throats. The dazzling sun shone in the distance, its light hitting the clouds and turning them a pure, brilliant white. It was the same cloud layer, yet from below it looked grey, and from above, it was pure white. It's like a wonderland, Liz murmured, irresistibly reaching a hand towards the sun. The halo of light shone through the gaps between her fingers, making her blink. The snowflakes that had surrounded them were gone. Beside her, there was only Lan. This world really is beautiful. It's truly the place I've always longed for, Will said, breathing out a warm puff of air. He had been in the Pokémon world for 5 months now, but he had never really taken a good look at it. In his first life, he was always confined to the outer edge of the forest on MT Silver. In his second life, as a Dratini, his mobility was terrible, and he couldn't go anywhere. It was only today, as a Dragonair with the ability to fly, that he could finally glimpse a beautiful corner of this world. Lan, have you ever seen the sea? Liz asked, stroking his back. No, Will shook his head. He had seen the sea in his past life, but not in this one. The ocean in this world must be so blue, and so full of life, Will thought with hopeful anticipation. In a few days, let's go to the seaside. I want to see more of this world, together with you, Lan. Okay, Will nodded, thinking it was a great idea. For the past 2 months, he had never seen Liz go out for fun, she had always stayed within the capital. He didn't know how she felt, but he himself was getting a little tired of it. He wanted to take her out for a look. To see this world, and to see the Pokémon of this world. In this magical world, whether in fire or water, in grass or forest, in the earth or in the clouds, or even in a certain girl's skirt, Pokémon could be found everywhere. It would be a real shame not to travel in such an interesting world. Will flew around in the air with Liz for a while longer. It wasn't until Liz sneezed that he realized there was a problem and quickly brought her back to the palace. Lord Lan! How could you take Lady Liz to do something so dangerous? The moment they returned, Hestia rushed up and gave him a fierce scolding. Others might be intimidated by Lan's new, large form, but not her. In their 2 months together, she had long since figured out his personality, which was why she dared to be so bold. Besides, she believed that with their current bond, he would never hurt her. Naya, Will stuck out his tongue, then turned and scooped up Liz with his tail and fled. Times had changed. Before, he would take a scolding because he was too slow to run away. From now on, he had no intention of obediently listening to Hestia's lectures. Haha, bye-bye, Hestia, Liz laughed nonchalantly, waving at the increasingly exasperated head maid. Lady Liz, how can you join Lord Lan in this foolishness? So many people are watching. What about your decorum? Hestia hiked up her maid's dress and gave chase. The guards and maids watching from the side couldn't help but smile and shake their heads. They could already predict what the palace would be like from now on. Night fell. Liz and Will snuck out of the bedroom, tiptoeing stealthily towards the kitchen. Because of the afternoon's incident, Liz had punished Will by not giving him dinner. Although she had secretly brought him some food, with his new physique, his appetite was much larger than before. This led to the current situation, Liz leading Will on a secret raid of the kitchen. SHH. As they passed Hestia's room, Liz deliberately turned and put a finger to her lips. Will nodded obediently, twitching the small wings on his head without making a sound. He was truly starving. Ahem. Just then, a cough suddenly sounded from a nearby corner. Will and Liz froze and whipped their heads in that direction. Hestia was standing there, her arms crossed. Hestia! Lan, run! Liz yelped, immediately turning to flee. Will also quickly turned, preparing to drift around the corner. All right, come with me. The food for Lord Lan has been prepared for a while now, Hestia's voice sounded again. Liz and Will turned back in surprise. Hestia felt a little stiff under their stares. She turned away uncomfortably and led the way. Hee hee. Ying. Liz and Will exchanged a look and shared a secret smile, then quickly followed. When they arrived at the kitchen, both of their eyes widened. The amount of food prepared could only be described as a mountain. It turned out Hestia had already considered that after his evolution, Will would need to eat much more. Hestia, you're the best. Will dove headfirst into the mountain of food and began to wreak havoc. When you're starving, you can't be picky. He took a huge bite, not caring what it was, and swallowed after a few quick chews. Hestia stood by, observing Will's appetite. This was his first meal after evolving, and she had to watch personally to determine how much food to prepare for him in the future. Hee, Liz stood to the side, a smile on her face as she watched the scene. Hestia, you really do like Lan, don't you? I do not. Chapter 39, The Trainer Development Plan. In the dead of night, after having eaten and drunk his fill, Will was faced with a dilemma. The bed was too small for him to sleep on. We'll have to have a bigger bed made tomorrow. For today, you'll have to make do, Lan, Liz said, looking at the large, soft bed with some vexation. A 2.5-meter bed wasn't exactly small, but it was certainly not enough for Will's current 9-meter length. Even if he coiled up most of his body, it would still be very crowded, and he would be uncomfortable. But no matter the situation, Liz never considered sleeping separately from Will. The thought of finding a separate room for him or building a large pool never even crossed her mind. She had grown accustomed to sleeping while hugging the soft Will and didn't want to be apart. All right, Will said, climbing helplessly onto the bed. At the same time, he used his long tail to curl around Liz, pulling her into his embrace. In the past, Will had been Liz's pillow. Now, the roles were reversed. Good night. The next morning, Will's eyes snapped open, his mind sharp and clear. From this day forward, everything would be different. His daily routine would no longer be going to the Primal Beast Academy to train. He was going to initiate the plan he had formulated earlier, the first trainer Liz development plan. Primal Beast Academy, I'm dropping out, Will announced unilaterally, without informing anyone. Knock, knock. A knock sounded at the door, and Hestia entered. She looked a little surprised when she saw that Will, curled up on the bed, was already awake. In all this time, it was the first time she had seen him wake up on his own. Lord Lan, it's time to get up, eat, and go to school. Princess Iris will be accompanying you today. Her? Doesn't she have lessons today? Will asked with a strange expression. He was sure today wasn't a holiday for Iris. I believe she heard the news of your evolution yesterday and couldn't wait to come over, Hestia explained, seeing the confusion on Will's face. I see. Now Will understood. Iris was definitely his #1 fangirl. If she had heard the news of his evolution and hadn't come running over at the first opportunity, he would have suspected something had happened to her. Will followed Hestia to the dining hall. The moment he entered, he saw Iris, who was sitting at the table, shoot up from her chair. Lan. Iris's eyes shone with a brilliant light upon seeing Will. She immediately rushed towards him. Splat! Because she was running too fast and her dress was too long, Iris tripped over her own skirt and fell flat on her face. A nearby maid quickly came over to help her up. But the little girl didn't learn her lesson. The moment she was back on her feet, she continued her charge towards Will. Lan, you're so beautiful. And so soft. Iris ran up to Will and threw her arms around him in a tight hug. But with his current girth, her small arms could no longer encircle him. She pressed her face against his chest and rubbed it vigorously, her entire face sinking into his body. The bright white area on a Dragonair's abdomen was soft and plush, just as it had been when he was a Dratini. It was soft, but not fragile, and was in fact very resilient. As for the other sea blue parts of his body, they looked smooth but were actually covered in a layer of sapphire-colored scales, which Will could control, making them either soft or hard. Get off, you're going to get snot on me, Will said, looking down at the little girl. Iris's face was flushed, and her nose was red, it looked like she might start running at any moment. Will used his tail to peel Iris off of him. The weather was getting colder, but Iris was still wearing a pretty princess dress. If she didn't catch a cold, who would? Will pulled Iris to the side and then began to quickly eat his own food. After evolving into a Dragonair, he no longer used a baby bottle. His main food had also switched from moo milk to some kind of cooked meat. This was mainly because the bottle was too small. For him, it was like trying to drink through a straw as thin as a toothpick, it was incredibly frustrating. Lan. Iris sat beside him, watching him eat, her two little legs swinging back and forth, excited about something. You're actually a lot like Liz was when she was a child, Will said, glancing at the little blue-haired girl and thinking back to the little red-haired Liz. For Liz, that was a memory from 20 years ago. For him, it had only been a little over 4 months. He remembered the weather had just turned to autumn, and the nights on MT Silver were cold. Liz could only rely on aspir berries to keep warm and had caught a bit of a cold after several days. But even so, the young Liz was still full of spirit, chirping around him all day long. But now, Liz was grown up. Never mind being cold for a few days, just sitting at her desk for a day of work would leave her exhausted and drained of all the vitality she had as a child. Lan, who are we fighting today? Today you'll see in a bit, Will said, a grin spreading across his face. Looking at the little blue-haired girl beside him, a marvelous idea suddenly popped into his head. If Liz could be a trainer, then of course Iris could too. And to be honest, Iris's potential as a trainer was far greater than Liz's. This wasn't just because of the dragon force, but also other factors like her personality, reflexes, and age. If it were the young Liz, she would have been a match for Iris in every way except for the dragon force, her intelligence might have even been higher. But the current Liz was not. She was tied down by too many trivial matters and couldn't be a full-time trainer. She would have to rely mainly on him to help her raise her Pokémon. From this day on, Will would start making frequent trips into MT Silver. Not only to catch suitable Pokémon for Liz, but also to battle strong wild Pokémon to gain experience. If Iris wanted to come along, that was fine too. Her dragon force could make many of his tasks twice as effective. At the same time, Will could also train Iris, raising her to be the Dragonite Kingdom's second complete trainer. As for the issue of safety, Will wasn't too worried. The Dragonite Kingdom was very close to MT Silver, and they had already carved out a path. There were outposts stationed at regular intervals along this road, each with a number of beast callers. If they encountered danger, they could just fly to a post immediately. And in MT Silver itself, he knew his limits. He wouldn't take Iris deep into the mountain. At this stage, he would only be looking for targets in the outer areas. His level of 31 was already top tier in the outer ring of MT Silver, there were very few Pokémon there that were his match. And there was one more important point. Having been a wild Pokémon for 2 months, he knew some of the laws of survival in the wild. When faced with an exceptionally large Pokémon, the vast majority of Pokémon would choose to flee. Will himself was no exception. After all, they couldn't see each other's specific levels and could only judge by size. No one dared to gamble on whether the opponent's level was higher than their own. If you won the bet, you might not gain much. But if you lost, it was almost certain death. Will's 9-meter-long body was incredibly intimidating. Unless he ran into a Pokémon like Onix or Gyarados, no wild Pokémon would dare to proactively attack him. Chapter 40, Return to MT Silver. After a whirlwind of a meal, Will's first order of business was to take Iris to change her clothes. He bundled her up in some of Liz's thick, old childhood garments until she was so puffy she could barely swing her arms. Only then did he nod in satisfaction. He coiled Iris onto the top of his head and then flew out of the palace. Hestia assumed he was just flying himself to the Primal Beast Academy, so she wasn't surprised. After all, with Will's current size, he no longer fit in a carriage. But Hestia seemed to have forgotten, Will was not the kind of good little beast who would obediently go to school. He was the problem child who had been fighting since his very first day. In the sky. Wow! We're flying! Iris gripped the feathery wings on the side of Will's head with her small hands, her legs kicking with excitement. Children truly are fearless. Despite being dozens of meters in the air, she wasn't scared at all. Don't move around, or I might drop you, Will said, shaking his head. Lan, where are we going? Aren't we going to the academy? Iris asked curiously, watching as Will flew right past the academy and left the capital of the Dragonite Kingdom behind. In her entire life, Iris had rarely left the capital. The few times she had, it was under the protection of many beast callers, heading to other towns within the kingdom. An experience like this, heading out alone with just a single beast, was a first for her. But Iris wasn't the least bit afraid. Or rather, she trusted Will completely. Will didn't answer her, the little girl wouldn't understand him anyway. He guessed that Iris had probably never been to MT Silver. After all, it was still the territory of primal beasts, only beast callers dared to enter and explore it. Moreover, Mt. Silver was the only place where the people of the Dragonite and Land Kingdoms would meet. Encounters there almost always led to conflict. A child like Iris would never be allowed to go there. About half an hour passed. Will finally arrived at the outskirts of Mt. Silver with Iris. "My butt hurts from sitting," Iris said, rubbing her rear as she slid down from Will's head. "Stop complaining. Today, you're going to get your very own Pokémon," Will said, slithering into the forest ahead of her. Although he could fly now, that didn't mean he had lost the ability to move on the ground. He certainly wasn't as fast as he was in the air or water, but it was still a massive improvement over his Dratini days. "Lan, wait for me. Are we going into the forest? My teacher said the forest is very dangerous, that there are beasts everywhere," Iris said, hurrying to catch up. She glanced cautiously into the depths of the woods. The fearless little rascal was finally starting to feel scared. Rustle, rustle. Suddenly, a nearby bush rustled, and an angry Rattata shot out. The Rattata had been sleeping soundly, but the noise had woken it up. It had charged out without a second thought, ready to teach a lesson to whoever had disturbed its beautiful dream. Rattata! Ah! A giant rat! The charging Rattata startled Iris, but the Rattata itself was startled by Will. To it, Will's form was more like a snake than a dragon, and snakes were the natural enemies of rats. "This little rat is about to get wrecked today," the Rattata thought, its very soul scared out of its body the moment it saw Will. "Lan!" Iris cried out, also frightened, and quickly hugged Will. She wasn't truly a stoic, emotionless girl, at least not in front of Will. She just had a bit of a deadpan face and wasn't very expressive. She wasn't dumb at all, in fact, Will had already noticed that she was very smart. The reason she had been so bold when they first met was that she knew that any beast inside the royal palace would not threaten her safety. But this was different. This was the forest, the wild. The Pokémon here were wild and would attack her, even kill her. And for a little girl who was only 1.25 meters tall, a Rattata from this era, which averaged 0.6 meters, was indeed a very large rat. To put it bluntly, a Rattata that had just matured could easily snap her in two with a single bite. "Ying, get lost," Will said, not even bothering to attack such a weakling, just giving the Rattata a glance. The Rattata froze, then scurried back into the bushes in a panic. It was moving. It was never coming back here again. Will watched the Rattata leave and continued deeper into the forest with Iris. It wasn't that a Pokémon like Rattata was weak. In this era, even owning a single Rattata could make one a high-status beast caller. But Will looked down on it. For Liz and Iris's Pokémon, he had more suitable choices in mind. Rattata didn't even make the list of backups. "Phew, that scared me." "You're amazing, Lan," Iris said with a sigh of relief as the Rattata ran off. She stuck close to Will's side. A few more similar situations occurred. Most wild Pokémon had strong territorial instincts and would inevitably come to investigate when they sensed intruders. After being scared a few times, Iris gradually calmed down. She discovered that with Will by her side, the wild beasts didn't dare to act out of line. Most of them would just take one look and immediately turn and run. Gradually, Iris's mentality changed. "Me and Lan, we're invincible," Iris declared, strutting proudly in front of Will, her chest puffed out and her head held high. She was like a proud little hen, patrolling her territory. "I remember it was around here," Will said, rolling his eyes as he scanned the area. Because of the memories from his first life, he was not unfamiliar with the terrain and layout of this area. But it had been 20 years since the Mt. Silver of his memory. Many things had changed that he didn't know about, so he still needed to search carefully. Did they die? Or did they move deeper in? But they should have at least left some descendants. Will crawled slowly through the forest, his eyes scanning the large trees around him. He was looking for a specific Pokémon, called Scyther. He remembered from his past life, when he was exploring the map as a Beedrill, that he had once seen a Scyther swarm in this area. That swarm had been incredible, occupying a huge piece of the outer territory, an area equivalent to his old land plus the Polarathas territory combined. But 20 years had passed, and the Scyther swarm seemed to be gone. He didn't know if they had migrated or been wiped out. A pity. After searching for a while and finding nothing, Will sighed. There were quite a few Pokémon worth raising in the Kanto and Johto regions, but not many could be found in the outer areas of MT Silver. Wool only had 3 or 4 main targets in mind, and Scyther was one of them. It had a base stat total of 500, with a good distribution focused on high attack and speed. It could also fly, allowing it to advance and retreat freely. It was a Pokémon you could use right after catching it. Moreover, Wool had to consider some practical issues, like evolution conditions. Even if he knew the evolution conditions for some Pokémon, he couldn't help them evolve. He had no idea where to get those evolution items, and the Dragonite Kingdom might not have them. So, the Pokémon he needed to catch had to be one of 2 types. First, a Pokémon that could evolve to its final stage just by leveling up. For this type, it didn't matter how weak its earlier forms were, as long as its final stage was strong, it could be a primary target. The second type was a Pokémon that was still worth raising and had high potential even without evolving. This type was extremely rare. Scyther was the latter.
Thanks for listening.